They called me the useless prince, the knowledge fool, the one Vermilion's son who could not swing a sword or cast a spell. I had heard it so many times it stopped hurting around age 12, which was a lie I told myself so often that some days I almost believed it. My father sat on his throne like the word disappointment had grown legs and learned to glare. He did not even stand, just tilted his chin toward me the way you tilt a boot toward something stuck to the sole. Your territory has been decided. Asgard. Pack your things. Asgard. The frontier wasteland at the edge of the kingdom, the land once ruled by the mad King Solomon, where monsters roamed and nothing grew. The place you sent people when you wanted them gone, but did not want the paperwork of an execution. I tried one last thing. I held up the farming hoe I had been working on for weeks. Reinforced iron, better leverage, a design that could triple crop yields. I had tested the angle myself, adjusted the weight until it felt right. It was the best thing I had ever made. The king raised one finger. A pulse of raw magic turned it to dust in my grip. Iron fragments scattered across the marble floor, and nobody moved to sweep them up. He told me that sort of thing was beneath royalty, that kings were supposed to be feared, not useful, that the mere thought of sharing blood with me made him sick. George, my eldest brother, leaned against a pillar with his arms crossed. He had the sword saint skill, the kingdom's strongest swordsman, and the particular talent of making cruelty sound reasonable. He said it could not be helped, that all my knowledge was just noise. Kyle laughed from the other side of the room. He called me a concubine's child and thanked me for lowering the bar so he and George could shine brighter. Then they both walked out. They did not look back. Neither did my father. The guards would not meet my eyes as I left. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the mockery, not the exile decree. The way grown men stared at their own boots rather than watch a prince be thrown away. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face go hollow. I played the part they expected, because if there was one skill I had mastered in this palace, it was looking like I had already given up. And then, once the corridor was empty and the last guard's footsteps had faded, I smiled. Because Asgard was exactly where I needed to be. The World Library had been feeding me fragments for years. Solomon's ruins, technologies lost to time. A skill everyone called worthless had been whispering about a place no one else wanted, and now my own father was sending me there like it was a punishment. A week later, the three of us rattled down a road that got worse with every mile. Diana drove the cart. She had long blue hair that people called cursed, sharp eyes, and the fighting skills of a near knight. She had followed me into exile without being asked, without being ordered. When I tried to thank her, she told me to shut up and steer. Wallace sat in the back, surrounded by crates of metal and tools he had smuggled out of the castle. He was a dwarf, short and broad, with an earth-brown beard and hands that could shape iron the way a sculptor shapes clay. He had left the royal army years ago because the king only wanted weapons and threw a fit whenever Wallace tried something new. "That king is no good," Wallace said, tapping a piece of scrap metal against his knee. "Only wants swords. I try one new alloy and he acts like I set fire to the treasury." Diana shifted on the driver's bench. "So what is Asgard actually like? No one else came with us. That says something." I opened the World Library in my head, the skill everyone mocked. No combat applications, no destructive power, just knowledge, stored in a mental archive I could search like a scholar searches a library. I asked it about Asgard. What came back was not encouraging. Solomon had once built a civilization there using technologies no one understood. Flying machines, explosives, devices that made the kingdom's best mages look like children with candles. After his death, a guardian golem killed every intruder. People stopped coming, and the monsters moved in. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she suggested we run. Just disappear. She and Wallace could earn enough to keep the three of us fed. We did not owe anything to a kingdom that threw us away. I told her I could not. But more than that, Solomon's ruins were in Asgard, his relics. Technologies from a mind that had changed the world once before. "I'm going to build a city there," I said. "A city so great that every fool who only believes in strength will come crawling to my gates, begging for my help." Wallace grinned. Diana called me an idiot, but did not argue. I turned to her. "Diana, thank you. Honestly, just me and Wallace would have been uneasy. I'm glad you came." She went red from the ears down, told me not to say things like that out of nowhere. Then she stared at the road ahead and did not speak for the next 2 miles. Wallace chuckled and muttered something about blue-haired stubbornness. The mansion had been white once. Now it was gray and green, strangled by ivy. Walls cracked where monsters had smashed smashed through. We pushed past the broken entrance into a wide hall that smelled like old stone and dead leaves. In the center of the room, lying on the floor as if she had simply decided to take a nap, was a woman. Except she was not a woman. She was made of metal, silver hair spread across the stone, white skin that gleamed faintly in the dim light. She wore a maid outfit, pristine, despite the ruin around her, and her face was so perfectly crafted that none of us moved. Wallace got there first. He dropped to his knees beside her and ran his hands over the metallic surface, muttering about construction quality and joint articulation. I touched her arm. The world library lit up like a door being thrown open. New shelves appeared, entire categories I had never seen, knowledge from somewhere that was not this world. The sheer volume made me dizzy. This was not a golem. This was a robot, a self-operating device built with technology from another world entirely. Diana, I said. She does not need magic. She needs lightning. Diana stared at me. Then she drew her mithril sword, channeled power through it, and sent a bolt of electricity into the figure on the floor. The robot absorbed it. Her eyes opened. She stood in one fluid motion and bowed. Good morning. My name is Galatea. I am not a golem. I am a robot who is to become the lord of this mansion. I told her I was Grace, the new lord of Asgard, and I asked about her creator, Solomon. Her expression shifted, a tightening around the eyes, a pause before she spoke. She said Solomon was her master and her father, that if a new lord stood here and she had been asleep, then her father was gone. She grieved, a machine built of metal and circuits, grieving for the man who made her. I offered her time to rest. She declined, said work was her joy. I told her she was not a tool, that she was my first citizen, not my property, that any being who could mourn the death of her father was no different from the rest of us. My own father could not manage grief for a living son. She was already more human than half the court I had grown up in. She went quiet, then she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that carried decades of loneliness in it. You say the same things my father said, she told me. I will accept you as my master. Diana appeared in the doorway with her hand on her sword hilt, watching Galatea with the particular suspicion of someone who has just been replaced as the most important woman in the room. I did not notice. My useless skill had just unlocked the most extraordinary being I had ever met. Then Diana's voice cut through the moment, sharp, urgent. Grace, monster, now. The ancient fire dragon filled the tree line like a nightmare had learned to breathe. Several meters long, moving through the undergrowth with a serpentine roll, scales the color of dried blood, eyes like furnace coals, the kind of threat that required an entire garrison to handle. We had a dwarf with a hammer, a knight with a sword, and a prince whose greatest achievement was a farming hoe that no longer existed. I told Diana to run, take Wallace, and go. I would buy them time. Diana's eyes went wide, then narrow. She told me she had not trained her entire life to protect me, just to abandon me to a lizard. Her voice cracked on the word protect, and I realized I had never heard her say out loud what she had gotten strong for. Wallace gripped his hammer and stood beside me. Neither of them moved. Galatea tilted her head. Master, she said, would you like me to eliminate that lizard? Before I could answer, she was moving. The dragon opened its jaws, fire building in its throat. Galatea walked straight into it. The flames washed over her, and she did not slow down. She planted one foot, pivoted, and kicked the dragon across the landscape. The ground shook. Trees snapped like kindling. The dragon tumbled end over end and vanished into the forest canopy with a sound like a building collapsing. Birds erupted from the tree line in every direction. The silence that followed was absolute. Galatea turned, walked back to us, and bowed. Ancient fire dragon successfully repelled. Wallace's hammer hung limp in his hand. Diana's sword was half drawn and frozen. My mouth was open, but nothing useful was coming out. Galatea closed her eyes and tilted her head forward. Reward, please. I blinked. What? My father used to pat my head when I did well. Reward, please. I placed my hand on her silver hair. She made a sound somewhere between contentment and a cat purring, and announced that she was happy. Diana sheathed her sword with more force than necessary. She muttered something about going to check for other monsters, and walked away at the kind of pace that suggested the monsters should be more worried about her. Wallace watched her go. That girl, he said, shaking his head. Every time. Galatea led us down a staircase hidden behind a wall panel. The passage opened into a chamber that took my breath away. The furnace dominated the room, enormous, built from materials I had never seen, radiating heat that made the air shimmer. Wallace crossed the distance at a dead run. He pressed his palms flat against the surface and started laughing. The temperature range alone would let him work metals no ordinary forge could touch. The World Library identified it as Solomon's Furnace, built by his father using technology from another world. Galatea brought me a wooden box and a letter. I opened the letter first. It was from Solomon's father, a man who had come to this world from somewhere else entirely. He wrote that he was dying and could not continue his work, that he was leaving his tools, his furnace, and Galatea to whoever found them. He asked one thing: take care of his daughter. The handwriting was steady. The man had known he was dying and had still written like someone building a bridge for a stranger he would never meet. I folded the letter and set it down carefully. Then I opened the box. Inside was a gun. The World Library flooded my mind. Mechanisms, propellants, ballistics. A weapon that needed no magic, no physical strength, no special skill, just aim and pull. I pointed it at the far wall and fired. The sound was enormous. The wall cracked. A hole the size of my fist appeared in solid stone. Diana came running down the stairs with her sword drawn, shouting about the noise. She stopped when she saw the hole in the wall. Then she looked at the gun in my hand. The exile they meant as a death sentence had just handed me the keys to a kingdom. I am going to build a town, I said, right here, using everything this workshop has, everything the World Library can teach me, everything we can create together. Nobody laughed. Nobody called me useless. Wallace cracked his knuckles. Galatea bowed. Diana crossed her arms and tried very hard not to smile. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first morning in Asgard smelled like wet dirt and nothing else. No bread, no servants, no schedule. Just me, a field of rocks, and a hoe Wallace had forged overnight using Solomon's furnace. I dug the blade into the ground and almost laughed. The World Library told me that hoe was plus 30 quality, twice as good as the mithril sword my eldest brother earned for winning his first war, a national treasure class farming tool. My father had snapped a hoe to humiliate me. Now, the replacement was better than anything his favorite son had ever held. Wallace was already below in the workshop, pulling metals from his bag, like a child emptying a toy box. Diana had built an earthen wall around the perimeter using magic, and was now testing her reforged mithril sword on the tree line. She looked happier than I had seen her since we left the capital. Galatea brought me water and mentioned that her father used to garden. He had used something called fertilizer. The word triggered the library: bone meal, calcium, nitrogen cycles. I sent Galatea to fetch the fire dragon bones. If dragon bone held concentrated magical minerals, grinding it into soil might do something no farmer in this world had ever seen. 2 days later, the potatoes broke the surface. They should have taken weeks. I pulled one, had Diana boil it, and bit in. What stopped me mid-chew was the sensation that followed. My fatigue vanished. My mind cleared. The potato was restoring magical energy like a high-grade potion, and it tasted 1,000 times better. Wallace told me what I had not figured out yet. Crops fed with monster bone fertilizer absorbed the creature's residual magic. Dragon bone potatoes kept you awake for a full day. Goblin bone potatoes barely took the edge off. The stronger the monster, the stronger the harvest. I sat in the dirt holding a potato that outperformed alchemy, grown by an exiled prince with 0 combat ability, and I thought, this might actually work. Goblins came after the crops on the 4th night, 4 of them, scrambling over Diana's earthen wall like rats over a fence. My first thought was not fear, it was rage. Those potatoes had taken 2 days to grow. I was not about to lose them to something half my height. Diana and I killed 3 before they touched a single plant. I shot 1 with the gun. She cut down 2. I let the 4th go, wounded, because the World Library told me one survivor carrying a limp back to the nest would keep the rest away longer than a massacre. Diana suggested spikes on the wall. That gave me an idea. Mithril alloy wire, twisted, with barbs at intervals. Wallace had it done by the next evening. Galatea installed it along the wall's top. I called it the Guardian's Chain and stood in front of it like I had just invented fire. Then Diana ran lightning magic through the wire and it held the charge. Anything that touched that fence was getting electrocuted. Galatea watched the whole demonstration and calmly informed me that the other world already had barbed wire and electric fences, powered by something called generators. The pride drained out of me so fast I could hear it go. Diana did not laugh. She told me that even if the concept existed somewhere else, I was the first person to build it here. That mattered. I held on to that harder than I wanted to admit. Between the farming and the defenses, I found time to explore. Diana, Galatea, and I walked through the forest and stumbled onto a rubber tree. The library identified it, but offered nothing useful yet. We kept walking and found the ruins of a village where Galatea had once lived. Houses demolished, foundations cracked, but half buried under rubble, I found a single cup made of aluminum alloy, engraved with a man and a girl who looked exactly like Galatea. She held it against her chest and did not speak for a while. On the walk back, an armored armadillo appeared outside the wall, half my height, covered in scales, claws like knives. Diana reached for her sword. I told them both to stand down. I needed this, not for them, for me. I pulled the gun from my coat, aimed at its head, and fired. One shot. It dropped. My hands were shaking. Galatea told me later that she had sensed the fear radiating off me the entire time, but she also said I looked cool. I told her not to tell Diana about the shaking part. Diana figured it out anyway. I do not dislike that about you, she said. That night, Wallace woke me before dawn, grinning so wide his beard was splitting. He held up a wire made of mithril and iron fused together, a mithril alloy, cheaper than pure mithril, easier to work, and it conducted magic just the same. The World Library confirmed it and credited Wallace as the inventor. He had done it without the library, without otherworld knowledge, just skill, a furnace, and dwarven stubbornness. We needed money. I dressed in the best clothes I had, which were not very good, and Diana and I rode into town. The Azure Trading Company was the biggest house in the city. I walked in with dragon scales and walked out with an insult. The merchant behind the desk offered half the market price without inspecting the goods. He looked at Diana like she was something stuck to his shoe. I kept my face blank, thanked him for his time, and left. Outside, she shrugged. I am used to it. Blue hair. People stare. Then she looked at me sideways. Why did you not sell? I showed her Wallace's letter. An introduction to Harrison Trading Company. Our real appointment had always been here. Azure was just recon. Diana slapped my back hard enough to knock the wind out of me. Then stop looking nervous and walk in there like you own the building. Edward Harrison met us personally. Middle-aged, blonde, sharp eyes behind a warm smile. He tasted the magic potato, appraised the mithril alloy, and went very quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he offered a fair price. He asked what else I had. I laid out my terms. Exclusive supply of mithril alloy, magic potatoes, and dragon materials. 3 conditions. Never ask how I make them. Give me priority on any Solomon relics that surface, and advertise that Asgard is recruiting settlers. Edward asked why I chose his company over Azure. I told him the truth. He had met me without an appointment. He had not flinched at Diana's hair, and when his employee muttered something ugly about me in the hallway, he had dressed her down on the spot. Edward laughed. Then he shook my hand and told me he would do his best to be worthy of the same loyalty I showed my knight. For the first time since the exile, someone outside my small circle had looked at me and seen something other than a waste of a royal name. The rubber came next. On a return trip from Edwards, I touched the rubber tree again, and the library finally unlocked. Rubber sap. Treat it with acid and heat, and it becomes elastic, durable, shapeable. Slimes in the area produced exactly the acid I needed, and mithril was the only material that resisted the corrosion. I brought the idea to Wallace. He looked unimpressed until I explained. Tires. Wrap them around carriage wheels. Absorb shock. And unlike the alloy, anyone could make rubber without Solomon's furnace. I could sell the manufacturing method to Edward and let his company produce it at scale. Wallace understood. This was not a weapon. This was something the whole kingdom could use. Diana came back from hunting with slime acid. Wallace and I worked through the night, adjusting ratios and temperatures, failing and retrying. Somewhere past midnight, Diana brought us buttered potatoes she had cooked herself. Some were oddly shaped, and she had a burn on her fingertip she tried to hide. I ate everyone and told her they were good. She muttered something about them being nothing special. Galatea announced that she detected a certain someone being modest. By dawn, the rubber was done. I held a sheet of it up to the light and stretched it between my fingers. It bounced back like a living thing. I sold Edward the manufacturing method for what I called slime rubber, not the product, the process. 10% of all rubber profits came back to Asgard, and Harrison would open a branch in my territory once I had a real town. Edward accepted without hesitation and invited me to a gathering of smaller trading companies who wanted to break Azure's grip. I said yes, shook his hand, walked outside, and silently pumped my fist where nobody could see me. On the road home, we found them. 5 people standing at the edge of the path, thin, dirty, children among them. A young girl whose stomach growled so loudly I heard it from the carriage. Their leader was a man named Arthur, a carpenter, 30 years old, hands like leather, eyes like someone who had watched people die. He told me they were war refugees. Their village near the border had been burned during a campaign led by the crown. They had split into groups, walked for weeks, lost people along the way. My father's campaign, my brother's soldiers. These people were running from my own family's war. I gave the girl cookies from Edward's shop and told Arthur to bring his people inside. As each refugee stepped through the door, I shook their hand, and the World Library quietly showed me everything: names, ages, occupations, criminal records. Arthur was clean, a carpenter and a born leader. A young man named Neil wanted to protect his sister, Noelle. 2 farmers named Johnny and Alfred, all clean, all desperate, all here because the kingdom that called me useless had burned their homes. I fed them dragon bone potatoes. By morning, they looked like different people. I gave them land. I let them choose their own work, which stunned them into silence. Johnny explained to Diana, tears running down his face, that commoners almost never owned land. I had just handed it to them for nothing. Arthur would build. Johnny and Alfred would farm. Neil would train as a guard under Diana. Noelle would work as a maid at the mansion. That last one caused a problem. The refugees went quiet. Noelle trembled. Neil looked like he wanted to say something, but could not. I realized too late what they thought. In this world, when a lord took in a refugee girl as a maid, it usually meant something else entirely. Diana stepped in before I could fumble the explanation further. She put a hand on Noelle's shoulder and told her, flat and clear, that if I ever tried anything, Diana would handle it personally. Then she looked at me with an expression that said, "Fix this." I told them I had someone I wanted them to meet. Galatea walked in and bowed like a portrait come to life. "I am Galatea," she said. "Maid of Lord Grace, please treat me well." She paused. "Also, I should warn you, I explode if you make me angry." Dead silence. "That was a robot joke. I do not actually explode. Thank you." The refugees stared. Then someone whispered that she was a golem built by the Mad King Solomon, and suddenly the room was buzzing. They had heard the rumors Edward had been spreading. Solomon's technology, Solomon's territory, Solomon's successor. I stood in front of them. I was Grace Vermilion, 3rd prince, exiled to this land, and I was claiming the title of Solomon's successor and Lord of Asgard. I swore to protect every person who followed me. No one in my territory would be discarded the way I had been. The room went quiet for one breath. Then Arthur started clapping. Neil joined. Noelle, still teary, clapped too. The sound filled the hall, and I felt something I had never felt at the palace. Just people choosing to believe in what I was building. It was not a kingdom. It was barely a camp. But for the first time in my life, someone had cheered for me, and I was not going to waste it. What I did not know was that my brother had been watching. Kyle received a report from the Azure Trading Company. Grace Vermilion was alive. Worse than alive, thriving. Magic recovering potatoes on the market. Mithril alloy in circulation. A settlement growing in a territory that was supposed to be a death sentence. He laughed when he read it. That was what the messenger told me later. Kyle had laughed like it was the funniest thing he had heard in years. He called my potatoes a marketing trick. He told the Azure merchants to obstruct my trade routes and began assembling his private army. The future king, he called himself. He did not know about Galatea. He did not know about the World Library. He did not know about Solomon's weapons sitting in my workshop. I was building a home. He was building a war, and I had no idea. The weeks that followed were the quietest I had ever known. Not silent, Asgard was louder than ever. Wallace and Arthur hammered from dawn until the light gave out, and somewhere between the new storehouse and the third residential building, they decided to build a statue of me. I protested. Wallace carved the nose so it could shoot arrows in an emergency. They built it anyway. Neil trained with Diana in the yard. She beat him with wooden swords until he could not stand, fed him potato chips that healed his wounds, then beat him again. When I asked if he wanted to stop, he wiped the blood from his lip and said he wanted power to protect everyone. He begged me not to tell Noelle. I did not tell Noelle. The fields were green. The farmers praised the new metal hose and the fertilizer that made everything grow twice as fast. Quiet in the way that mattered. No crisis, no threat, just building. 20 new settlers arrived through Edward's recruitment. Donovan, a coal miner and Arthur's relative, showed up with calloused hands and a pickaxe skill perfect for the mithril mine I had been planning. I shook his hand and told him he was welcome. He looked at me like no one had ever said that to him before. Noelle surprised me. I had been tinkering with a refrigerator prototype when she walked in, examined it, and suggested a central cooling rod that would use less material and last longer. It was a better design than mine. I asked her to join Wallace and me in the research workshop. She said yes before I finished the sentence. My father would have seen that as a threat. I saw it as the whole point. Edward invited me to a merchant gathering at his estate. I agreed because it was strategically sound. I prepared the refrigerator prototype as a souvenir because I wanted to show off. Two different motivations. I was honest about both. Chris drove us in the carriage. Diana spent most of the ride complaining about how dresses restricted her sword arm. Galatea waved us off from the mansion steps and told me not to do anything she would have to apologize for later. The party was warmer than any I had attended in my old life. Edward introduced me to two merchants who shook my hand like they meant it. One specialized in metalwork. The other was a food merchant who had gained visible weight from my potatoes and wore it like a badge of honor. They thanked me, genuinely, for breaking the Azure monopoly, for creating products that let smaller companies compete. This was the first party where nobody looked at me with contempt. Then Diana walked in. She wore a red dress that she clearly hated. Her blue hair fell loose over her shoulders instead of tied back for combat. She looked furious and beautiful and completely out of her element. I gave her the necklace before I could talk myself out of it. A water blue gem on a silver chain. I fastened it around her neck myself, and my fingers were steadier than they had any right to be. "It suits you," I said. Her face went red, not anger red, the other kind. Edward suggested we dance. I took her hand and my body remembered the waltz I had practiced years ago. They never held that debut party, but Diana had been my practice partner, and her steps still matched mine perfectly. The room watched. I did not care. After the dancing, Edward pulled me aside to a smaller gathering. A woman named Sarah worked there, serving meals and reading the room the way only someone who had spent years listening could. I ended up talking to her, not about trade or politics, about Diana. The words came out before I could organize them. I told her about a knight who had followed me into exile, who believed in me when I was nothing, who hit me when I was being stupid, and stood behind me when the world was trying to crush me. I told her I could not stop thinking about Diana in that dress, and that the feeling in my chest when we danced was something I had no framework for. Sarah set down her glass and looked at me like I was the dumbest smart person she had ever met. "That is love," she said, not gently, matter-of-factly. Imagine her standing next to another man, smiling at him the way she smiled at you tonight. How does that feel? The answer hit me before the question finished. It felt like the ground dropping out. Sarah laughed, the way you laugh when someone finally sees what everyone else noticed months ago. "Go tell her." I stepped outside to clear my head and found Diana waiting by the entrance in her combat stance, hand on her sword, red dress and all. She had followed me. She had been standing guard the entire time I was inside, in the cold, because she overheard Edward planning to bring me somewhere without telling her and assumed the worst. "I am your guard," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. I did not tell her what Sarah had helped me realize. Not yet. Instead, I asked if she wanted to walk back together. She said yes. We walked side by side through the quiet streets. I did not reach for her hand, and she did not reach for mine, but the space between us was smaller than it had ever been. Diana had been with me since I was a boy, an orphan with blue hair that people called a curse, alone until I shared my cookies with her and told her that her hair was a sign of extraordinary magic. She became my servant, then my student, then my knight. She could have served anyone. I had never once told told her what that meant to me. The necklace caught the moonlight as we walked. She touched it with her fingertips, just once, and said nothing. I said nothing. But the silence between us was the warmest thing I had felt in years. We were both afraid of the same thing, that reaching for happiness would mean losing it. The storm was coming, and I could not hear it. All I heard was the sound of her boots beside mine on the cobblestones, steady and sure. The mine smelled like iron and old rain. Wallace held the torch ahead while I ran my fingers along the rock face, black stone, reddish-brown clay. Every time I touched something new, knowledge bloomed behind my eyes like pages turning themselves. The black stone could store magic. The clay was bauxite, the raw material for aluminum. I had walked into a cave looking for mithril and stumbled into a technological revolution. This mine is a treasure trove, I said, and I meant it. Wallace grunted and kept digging, because dwarves do not get excited about words. They get excited about results. Galatea found the bauxite. She held it out to me with both hands, like a child presenting a gift. And when I told her she had just advanced the world's industry by a century, she beamed. Then she asked for a reward, which I promised and immediately forgot the details of. We were laughing about it when Galatea stopped. Her head turned toward the tunnel entrance, and the warmth drained from her face. "Master, there is a fire in the village." The words hit me like cold water. I climbed onto Galatea's back, and she launched us out of the mine at a speed that turned the trees into a blur. My heart was hammering. Then I saw it. A shape falling out of the sky, trailing smoke. A wyvern cut clean through the middle, tumbling toward the forest floor. And a sound I had never heard before. A crack, sharp and final, like thunder breaking a bone. We landed in the village square. Wyvern bodies lay scattered across the dirt. 5, 6, more than I could count at a glance. And standing in the middle of all of it, slightly dusty, completely unharmed, was Diana. She was holding a weapon I had never seen. A blade fused to something mechanical, glinting with mithril alloy. A sword and a gun married into one impossible instrument. "You are safe," I said, and my voice cracked on the second word. She looked at me the way she always does when I worry too much. One eyebrow up, mouth set flat. "I defeated all the wyverns, no casualties." She turned the weapon in her hand. "Wallace made it for me. I have been feeling useless since Galatea arrived, and he saw through it. He built this from your gun as a blueprint. Wallace had reverse engineered my firearm and turned it into a magic-powered hybrid. Mithril bullets charged with fire magic, propelled through a barrel fused to a blade." Diana's voice dropped. "I am no longer a royal guard. I am Diana of Asgard, and I will protect not just you, but this entire village." I just stood there, watching her redefine herself with a weapon nobody in the world had ever held before. Galatea broke the silence. "Master, I have detected human hostility. The wyvern attack was deliberate. Someone sent them. The warmth left me. Not a random monster incursion. A message. Can you track whoever sent them? They are fleeing. I can catch and eliminate them now." "No," I thought for a moment. "Let them run. Follow without being seen. A pawn like that will lead us to the person giving orders." Galatea's eyes narrowed with something close to delight. She vanished into the tree line without a sound. That night, I went to the workshop and said the words I had been avoiding for months. "Wallace, I need you to help me make guns." He put down his hammer. He did not look surprised. He looked like he had been waiting for me to say it and dreading it in equal measure. "Do you understand what you are asking?" His voice was low. "Weapons from another world. If these get out, people will die. I know, because the attack was not random. Someone hired a mercenary to destroy what we have built. And next time, Diana might not be enough." I met his eyes. "I want to protect this village. That is the only reason." He held my gaze for a long time. Then he exhaled through his nose and picked up his hammer. "Fine, then let us go to the workshop. We start tonight." Diana was leaning against the doorframe. She had been listening. I turned to her. "Diana, if I ever lose myself, if the weapons change me, if I start becoming someone who uses them for more than defense, stop me." Her expression softened. "There is a difference between taking up arms to protect and swinging them to take." She looked away, and color crept up her neck. Also, Galatea and Noelle both got head pats. I have been trying to be honest lately, so I would like one too. The knight who killed a dozen wyverns single-handedly was blushing because she wanted me to pat her head. I reached out. Her hair was dusty from the fight, but underneath it was soft. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped back, face burning, and muttered something about checking the perimeter. Wallace watched her go. He turned to me with the expression of a man who has seen everything. "If you're going to flirt, do it somewhere private. Now come, we have a rifle to build." 2 days without sleep. When dawn broke, we had a prototype rifle, mithril alloy barrel, fire magic stone ignition, mithril bullets. I aimed at the earthen wall, pulled the trigger, and the recoil nearly dislocated my shoulder. The bullet punched clean through. Diana caught my arm before I fell backward. Her grip was absolute. She was smiling, which was rare enough that I committed it to memory. "Works," I said. "Works," she agreed. I gathered everyone. 28 souls standing in the village center, looking at me. I told them the truth. The wyvern attack was not an accident. It was deliberate, likely ordered by the Azure Trading Company. More attacks would come, worse ones. Then I gave them the choice. If anyone wants to leave, say so now. I will give you money and provisions. I will not think less of you. But if you stay knowing what is coming. Silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Then Arthur stepped forward. "You gave us land. You gave us food. You gave us work. Where would we even go?" He looked around at the others. "We are staying." One by one, they nodded. Neil, Noel, Donovan, Sarah, every single person in that square. Nobody left. Something cracked open inside my chest. Not pain, something warmer. These people had been discarded the same way I had. I had given them a home, and now they were choosing to defend it. "Then we train," I said. "Starting today." Galatea came back with a name, Raymond Azur, head of the Azure Trading Company. He had hired a mercenary called the Dragon Tamer to attack us. Diana strapped the gunblade to her hip without a word. We walked into Raymond's office like we owned it. Galatea carried a large bag over her shoulder. Diana kept one hand on her weapon. I sat down in Raymond's chair before he could object. Raymond was furious. He tried to have us thrown out. His servant took one look at Diana and decided employment was not worth dying for. I told Galatea to open the bag. She upended it on his desk, and wyvern hides spilled across the polished wood. The same wyverns his mercenary had sent to destroy my village. I watched his face drain of color. I kept my voice flat. No threats, no shouting, just facts. I knew what he had done. I knew who he had hired. If monsters attacked my territory again, I would come back, and next time, I would not be carrying hides. The Dragon Tamer was in the room. He started to rise. Diana drew her weapon and held the edge to his throat before he finished standing. He sat back down. Raymond stammered something about cooperation. He agreed to buy the wyvern hides at whatever price I named. He was shaking. We left. In the carriage, I let out a breath I had been holding for 20 minutes. "You look like the usual obnoxious prince," Diana said. "The kind that makes people want to punch you. That was the goal." Raymond was scared, but scared men do desperate things. I was right. Days later, Galatea intercepted reports confirming that Raymond had received a letter from Kyle. My brother was offering his support, the merchant and the prince, allied against the village in the wasteland. The spy arrived wearing the face of a penitent. His name was Silver, a farmer who had fled Asgard weeks earlier. He came back claiming he had reconsidered, claiming guilt, claiming he wanted to help. I shook his hand. The world library opened like a vault door, and everything spilled out. Silver had been captured by Raymond's agents after leaving. They had recruited him. He was here to map our defenses, count our weapons, and send the information back through a carrier pigeon hidden in his belongings. He stood in front of me with his hands clasped and his eyes down, and he lied to my face. "Has anything happened since you left this territory?" I asked. "No," he said. "Nothing special. I had given this man food and money when he left. Now he was standing in my home, lying to me, working for the people who wanted to burn everything I had built." I rang a small bell. Galatea appeared, smiling. To Silver, she looked like a household maid. He had no idea what she actually was. "Take our guest to the room downstairs," I said. "Make him comfortable." Silver thanked me. Galatea led him away, still smiling. I stood alone in the corridor and laughed. It came out wrong, hollow, because what came next was ugly. Galatea would sit across from Silver every 5 minutes, expressionless, and ask him a single word, and he would break, not from pain, from the slow, relentless pressure of a machine that does not tire, does not blink, and does not believe a single word you say. Diana found me there. She did not ask what happened. She just stood behind me and put her arms around my chest. "You do not have to force a smile if it hurts," she said. I wanted to tell her I was fine, but her arms were warm. Silver's face when he lied to me. That was the part that hurt. Not the betrayal itself, but how easy it was for him. "I am going to protect the people who stayed," I said, "no matter what it costs." She tightened her grip. She did not let go. Silver broke before dawn. Silver was soaked, thin, and shaking. His composure was gone. He was begging before I finished sitting down. "Please," he said. "Every 5 minutes she just looks at me and asks one question, and I cannot take it anymore. Please, I will tell you everything." So he told me. The Azure Trading Company planned to disguise private soldiers and hired adventurers as bandits and attack the village. Kyle himself would participate. They expected Silver's intelligence to give them the advantage. I pulled out the rifle. Silver stared at it the way a rabbit stares at a hawk. "This is what my people carry now," I said. "It fires faster than a bow and hits harder than a mage's spell at short range. Your employer does not know we have these." His face went white. I had him write a letter, true details mixed with false ones. Our numbers, slightly wrong. Our weapon capabilities, significantly understated. The direction of our weakest flank pointed exactly where I wanted Kyle's forces to approach. Silver's hands shook the entire time. When he finished, I had him blow his whistle. The carrier pigeon came. The letter was tied to its leg and released through the window. "After the battle," I said, "I will decide what happens to you. Until then, you stay here. Food will be provided." I left with Galatea. The door closed behind us. "He will fly into the flame," I said, "like a moth. Kyle will attack from the direction we chose, with the numbers we predicted, and he will not know what is waiting for him." Galatea walked beside me in silence. The morning light through the narrow windows was cold and gray, and for the first time since the wyverns came, the dread in my chest felt less like fear and more like certainty. A few days passed. The training continued. The mine produced mithril and magic stones. Wallace forged more rifles, more armor. The village became something harder than it had been before, something with edges. Diana and I walked the perimeter at dusk, the way we always did. She reported on the militia's progress. Neil was improving. The rifles were effective but slow to reload. Everyone could handle a handgun at close range. The conversation wound down. The sky was turning from gold to violet. Somewhere behind us, the village was settling into evening, and the smell of Sarah's cooking drifted across the path. I had something to say. I had been carrying it for weeks, and the weight was becoming unbearable. "Diana, there is something I need to tell you. After the battle is over, I want to—" She stopped walking, turned to face me. Her eyes were fierce. "Say it now." "I was going to wait until—" "That is a death flag," she said. The words were blunt, almost angry. "People who say they will confess after the battle do not survive the battle. Say it now, or do not say it at all." My heart was hammering. Every clever thing I had ever said in my life abandoned me at once. "Diana, I love you." My voice was shaking. "I think I have always loved you. I just did not know how to say it because you were my knight, and I was a prince, and none of those words fit what you actually are to me. Marry me." She stared at me. The fierceness melted off her face, and what was underneath was something I had almost never seen: vulnerability. She reached up and pressed both palms against her cheeks, as though she could push the color back down. "I have been waiting for those words for years," she said. "I cannot wait anymore." Then her expression shifted. Something harder moved behind her eyes. Practical, resolved. "Thank you, Grace. I have always loved you." Her voice was steady now, but her hands were still shaking. "But I will not marry you. You are a prince and the lord of Asgard. Your first wife should be someone of status, someone who can strengthen your position. I am an orphan with cursed hair. The kingdom would never accept it." The words hit like a fist, not because they were cruel, because I could hear how long she had rehearsed them. "Then I will rise high enough that it does not matter," I said. "I am going to marry you, Diana. That is not a request." She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she stepped forward, grabbed the collar of my shirt, and kissed me. Our teeth clashed. Neither of us knew what we were doing. She pulled back, mortified, and I pulled her close again. The second one was better, softer. Her hands unclenched against my chest, and for a few seconds, everything else fell away. We walked home holding hands. Neither of us said a word. We did not need to. Galatea, Wallace, and Noel were waiting at the entrance. All three of them wore identical expressions of barely contained amusement. Diana dropped my hand like it was on fire, turned scarlet, and marched inside without looking at anyone. Wallace scratched his beard. "I told you, somewhere private." Days later, a letter arrived from Edward. I read it twice, then a third time, because the words did not change. Kyle was coming. He had assembled a force of mages and soldiers, backed by the Azure Trading Company. They would arrive within days. I set the letter down and pressed my hands flat against the desk. Everything I had built was about to be tested. I found Diana on the porch. She was sharpening her gunblade, and the rhythmic scrape of metal was the only sound in the dark. "Edward sent word," I said. "Kyle is coming." She did not stop sharpening. "How long?" "Days." She nodded. The blade caught the moonlight. "I will protect you, no matter what." "I know." I sat beside her. Our shoulders touched. "I meant what I said, Diana. All of it." She was quiet for a long time. Then, without looking at me, she said, "I know you did." The night was cold. The stars were out. Somewhere to the east, my brother was marching toward us with an army, armed with false intelligence and real fury, and he had no idea what was waiting for him. I was terrified. I was ready. That had to be enough. The goblins came exactly as planned. Galatea had opened a gap in the Guardian's chain at dawn, and the high-grade potatoes did the rest. 60 or 70 of them poured out of the tree line. Drawn by food they could smell from half a mile away. Neil's militia was already in position, rifles loaded, hands shaking. "Fire," Neil said, not a shout, a whisper into the silence before the world cracked open. The volley cut through the front rank like a scythe. Goblins tumbled. The ones behind grabbed the dead and used them as shields, but the bullets punched through the corpses and kept going. The goblins did not understand what was killing them. They just fell. Galatea's voice rang across the field. "Numbers in our favor. Switch to close combat." Neil's squad drew swords and moved in behind their super mithril shields. The remaining goblins could not touch them. Arrows bounced off. Clubs shattered. Methodical, ugly, effective. Then the goblin champion charged out of the forest with a great sword that could split a horse. The militia froze. I felt my own breath catch. One shot. The sniper in the watchtower put it down before it crossed the clearing. It hit the ground face first, skidded 3 feet, and did not move again. Neil ran toward me afterward, grinning so wide I could count his teeth. "Did you see that? We did it." I saw. I clapped his shoulder. "Feast tonight. Everything at the cafe is on me." He whooped and ran back to his squad, and I watched him go, with a warmth in my chest that lasted about 30 seconds. Because behind the warmth was the truth I could not say out loud. The goblins were a warm-up. Kyle was not going to charge across an open field. Kyle was going to come with mages and wyverns and every dirty trick his money could buy. That night, I sat in my study and ran through Kyle's likely approach for the 100th time. Silver's false intelligence told Kyle that our only weapons were short-range handguns, that the walls were weakest on the eastern side, and that the militia numbered 10. All of it was wrong. The rifles had twice the range of Kyle's mages. The eastern wall was our strongest point, with 3 sniper positions built into stone, and the militia was trained, armored, and angry. Kyle would walk into a killing field. I knew all of this, and still, I could not stop running the scenarios, because Kyle was the kingdom's greatest mage, and I had never commanded a real battle. Galatea turned from the window. "Master, you have reviewed this plan 14 times. Your heart rate has been elevated for 3 hours. 15 times. I closed my eyes. His forces will include Raymond's mercenaries, adventurers, and a dragon tamer with wyverns. Maybe the fire dragon again. Then I will handle the dragon. You know this." I did know it, but knowing did not make my hands stop shaking. I learned later what Kyle was doing while I could not sleep. He was drinking wine. Raymond sat across from him, and together they reviewed Silver's intelligence like generals who had already won. He ordered Grace, Diana, and Wallace captured alive, because our inventions were worth more than our deaths. The part that stung was not the arrogance. Kyle genuinely considered himself cautious. He reminded Raymond not to underestimate me. He was being thorough, and every piece of information he was being thorough with was a lie I had written myself. They came at night. Diana felt them first. Her wind magic picked up voices at the tree line, then the crackle of gathering mana. Dozens of shapes, approaching the eastern wall exactly as planned. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped the moment real bodies appeared at my walls. "Riflemen ready," I said into the dark. 9 acknowledgements came back. 9 hidden positions along the eastern fortification, each with a clear line of fire into the killing ground below. The first spell lit up the night. A mage at the front of the column raised his arms and began an incantation, fire gathering between his palms, aimed at the wall. The light made him a perfect target. The hidden rifleman fired. The crack echoed across the valley. The mage dropped before the spell completed, and the magic he had gathered detonated without direction. Fire bloomed outward and scattered his own comrades. chaos, screaming. The mercenaries could not see where the fire was coming from. They had prepared for magic, for arrows, for swords, not for bullets from positions they could not locate. A second mage tried to cast. Another crack. He went down. A third began running for cover and took a shot through the shoulder that spun him into the dirt. The attackers were retreating before they had advanced 10 paces. The ground forces broke. They ran for the tree line, abandoning wounded, dropping weapons. The rifle fire followed them, not chasing, just ensuring they kept running. I watched it happen and felt nothing that resembled triumph, only a cold mechanical satisfaction, like watching a trap close exactly as designed. Then the sky split open. Wyverns, 5 of them, diving through the dark with riders on their backs, and a fire dragon behind them so massive it blotted out the stars. And riding one of the wyverns was a face that looked like mine, Kyle. He could never resist a spotlight. The wyverns dove. Galatia's traps caught 2 of them, guardian chains wrapped in cloth, strung across the approach lanes, invisible in the dark. The wyverns hit them at full speed and screamed as the chains tangled their wings and brought them crashing down. The other 3 banked and opened their mouths, and dragon fire raked across the fortifications. Soldiers dove for cover. The wooden platforms caught flame. The ground shook. Something shifted inside me. Not fear, something worse. I looked at Kyle burning my home, and I felt a surge of something raw and primal that had nothing to do with strategy. I wanted to kill him. The intensity scared me. My father was a battle-crazed man who measured the world by the damage he could inflict. I had sworn I would never become him. Diana touched my arm, light, grounding. Hey, her voice cut through the noise. If you truly go on a rampage, I will stop you properly. So do what you need to do. I am right here. I exhaled. The red haze pulled back. The commander returned. Galatia, take the fire dragon. Of course, master. Give me a reward when I return. She launched herself into the sky like a silver arrow. Diana and I dropped from the wall and moved toward the breach. Neil's squad was holding the gap with shields and handguns, firing at the remaining ground troops who had regrouped after the initial rout. Neil was bleeding, a cut across his forehead that ran red into his left eye. He was still firing, still holding. Where is Kyle? I asked him. He pointed toward the far side of the breach. Landed his wyvern there. He has a boy, one of ours, using him as leverage. My stomach dropped. Kyle had not changed at all. Even now, even amid battle, he was playing games with other people's lives. I looked at Diana. She nodded once and we moved. Kyle was standing beside his grounded wyvern, examining a super mithril shield like it was a curiosity at a market stall. Neil's rifle lay on the ground near his feet, and slumped against the rubble behind Kyle, bleeding from a head wound, was a young militiaman, one of ours. Kyle noticed me. The smile that spread across his face was the same one I remembered from childhood. The smile that came before something got broken. He told me he was impressed, that the guns and the metal were remarkable, and that together with his magic, they could build an army that would crush even Georg. He spoke about conquest the way I spoke about farming, casually. I told him his technology speech was missing the point. These inventions could improve lives, build infrastructure, feed people, not just arm them. He laughed at that. The sound was exactly like our father's, dismissive, certain. Then he proposed his terms. Surrender Diana and Wallace, submit to him, and he would spare Asgard. He described the humiliation he had planned for Diana, and the casual cruelty of it made my blood go cold. Too bad, I said. Diana is my girlfriend. I would die before I let you touch her, he stammered. I had caught him off guard, the great mage, flustered by a sentence. Then his composure came back. He reminded me of a day when we were children, and he had burned me with a fire spell until I cried. He promised to make me cry again. I pulled the rifle from inside my coat and leveled it at his chest. I am not the boy you burned. I am Grace Vermillion, Lord of Asgard, and you are standing in my home. The battle was short. Kyle opened with simultaneous spells. Fire arrows from one hand, a wind barrier from the other. His magic saint skill at full display. The wind wall caught my bullet dead. The fire arrows tore toward Diana. She stepped in front of me. Her wind barrier softened the blast, and she stumbled back but held her ground. Then she raised the gun blade and fired. The mithril bullets were different from mine. Diana had loaded them with fire magic. They hit Kyle's wind barrier, stopped, and then detonated inside it. His own shield became an oven. He screamed and threw himself sideways, summoning water magic to douse the flames, then creating an ice wall to block the next volley. Diana did not give him time to breathe. She closed the distance, blade forward, and the gun blade's edge found his arm. The impact shattered bone. Kyle's left arm dropped, useless. the joint destroyed beyond repair. He fell to one knee. His remaining hand clutched the stump where the joint had crumbled. I thought it was over. He faked the collapse. While Diana paused to check on me, fire gathered in his remaining hand. A final spell aimed at her back. Even broken, even bleeding, Kyle would rather gamble on one last trick than accept that he had lost. I fired. The bullet hit his torso and the spell died. Kyle pitched forward, face in the dirt, still shouting that he was the future king, that someone would save him, that he was Kyle Vermillion, and the world owed him more than this. Nobody answered. The silence after his voice stopped was the loudest thing I had ever heard. A roar split the sky. Then a crash so massive it shook the ground beneath my feet. Galatia's voice carried down from somewhere above the cloud line, calm and precise. Master, the fire dragon is defeated. The dragon tamer is incapacitated. Kyle heard it. Whatever defiance was left in his face crumbled. His trump card, gone. Handled by a maid in a dress who did not consider a fire dragon worth more than a brief detour. A final wyvern dove toward us. Diana pushed me down, rolled clear, raised the gunblade, and fired a single shot into the wyvern's belly. The mithril bullet detonated on impact. The wyvern, its rider, and the last shred of Kyle's plan vanished in a ball of fire. The remaining wyverns scattered into the night. The mercenaries threw down their weapons. The palace guards dropped to their knees. It was over. I stood over my brother. His shattered arm lay at an angle that made my stomach turn. He was alive, but only because Diana's strikes had been precise enough to break without killing. I raised my rifle and pointed it at his head. The world went quiet. Everything inside me narrowed to a single point, and the single point was a trigger. I wanted to pull it. Every exile, every insult, every childhood burn, every laugh at my expense. He had attacked my home, hurt my people, used one of my own villagers as a hostage. He deserved it. My finger tightened, then a hand on my arm, not pulling, not stopping, just there, warm against the cold metal of my armor. Grace, Diana's voice, quiet. You asked me to stop you if you lost yourself. This is me stopping you. I stared at Kyle's unconscious face. It looked like mine. Same jaw, same cheekbones, different choices. I lowered the rifle. The breath that came out of me felt like it had been trapped for years. My hands were shaking again. From how close I had come to crossing a line I could never uncross. Secure him, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. He faces judgment, not execution. Diana took the rifle from my hand. Her fingers lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say that the silence did not already carry. The battle was over. The counting began. Neil found me in the village square. His head wound had been bandaged, and his eyes were red-rimmed but steady. He handed me a list, 4 names, 4 of our people who would not see the morning. I read each name twice. I knew them all. They had followed me because I promised them Asgard would be different. I folded the list and put it in my pocket. The paper was warm from Neil's hand. Galatia landed beside me, maid dress untouched by dragonfire. She reported the total surrender with the same calm she used to offer me morning tea. Prisoners secured, enemy combatants disarmed, casualties on their side, significant, on ours. She paused. The pause was worse than any number. 4, I know. Militia members were tying prisoners' hands. Others were putting out the last fires. The eastern wall had a gap the size of a house. The barricades were ash, but Asgard stood. It did not feel like victory. It felt like the morning after a fever breaks. I gave orders. Secure the prisoners. Treat the wounded on both sides. Begin wall repairs at dawn. Then I stood there with Diana beside me and 4 names in my pocket, and I held it together because the commander does not grieve until the war is over. The war was over. The grief could wait one more day. The fires were out. That was the first thing I noticed. The silence was worse than any of it. No hammering, no arguments, no laughter from the kitchen, just wind through gaps in walls that used to be whole. Galatia walked beside me, cataloging damage I did not want to hear quantified. 3 houses gone. The eastern barricade scorched to its foundation posts. Neil was sitting on the low wall near the well, bandage around his head, militia coat still on. He had not slept. 4, his voice cracked on the number. 3 guards and 1 civilian who could not get clear in time. I sat next to him. The stone was cold through my trousers. He started talking, fast, broken, the way people talk when they are trying not to scream. He blamed himself. He said their names, and I listened to everyone because those names deserved to be carried. Neil. I waited until he looked at me. His eyes were red and young and angry at the wrong person. You held that line with a head wound and a squad of refugees against the king's personal guard. 4 losses in a battle that should have killed us all. You did that." He shook his head. I put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed until I felt the trembling slow. "They would not want you sitting here bleeding through your bandage," I said. "They would want you to eat something terrible and complain about it. That is what we are going to do, right now." He almost laughed. It came out closer to a sob, but it moved something in him. He stood up. I stood up. Galatea tilted her head at both of us and said nothing, which was the kindest thing she could have done. I ordered the victory party because the living needed it more than the dead needed silence. The pig went on the spit. Edward's wine came out of the cellar. I told them to drink until they forgot, and then drink a little more, because tonight we had earned the right to be loud. They were loud. Not the clean, bright kind. This was the ragged, desperate kind, where people laugh too hard at jokes that are not funny and then go quiet for 30 seconds before someone forces the noise back. Diana stood near the doorway with her gunblade at her hip, watching like a sentry who could not stop being a sentry. Neil drank with the militia and let them call him captain, and the word confused him every time, like he had not earned it yet. I walked through the hall and shook hands and lied about how everything was going to be fine. A lord's job. Halfway through the night, I asked Diana to scold Neil. He needed someone to knock the self-pity out of him with blunt force, and she was the bluntest force I knew. She walked over and said something I could not hear. His face went through 3 colors. He stood up straighter and started talking about training drills for next week. The party was winding down when I noticed light under a guest room door. Noelle was sitting on the floor beside a cot where Neil had finally passed out. She had a damp cloth pressed to his forehead with the patience of someone who had been doing this for hours. "I will get him to his room," I said. We carried him together. She took his legs, I took his shoulders, and we shuffled down the corridor in the graceless way 2 people manage when the unconscious person outweighs both their expectations. After we set him down, she turned to me in the hallway. The lamp behind her caught the edge of her face, and she looked older than she was. "You are not a bad lord," she said. The words came out fast, almost angry. I remember what it was like before. No food, no walls, no one who cared if we lived or died. You gave us all of that. You gave my brother a reason to stand up straight. I opened my mouth to deflect. She cut me off. 4 people died. That is terrible. But 20 survived because of what you built. We are alive because you chose to fight for us. Her eyes were bright and fierce, and not asking permission. You are the best lord I have ever known. That is not flattery. That is a fact. She hugged me, quick, tight, and then gone, back down the hallway before I could respond. I stood in that corridor for a long time. The lamp flickered. The hall was empty. She had no reason to lie to me, no political angle, no alliance to maintain. That was exactly why her words cut through every wall I had built since the battle ended. The next morning, I loaded a wagon. In the back, gagged and tied, was Silver. Edward met us at the Trade Road Junction. The Azure Trading Company headquarters sat in the merchant district like a fat man in a chair, wide, self-important, and deeply unaware of how precarious his position had become. We did not knock. Galatea opened the doors with one hand. I walked past the stammering receptionist. I kicked open Raymond's office door. He was drinking wine at midday. After a battle that killed 4 of my people with mercenaries he had paid for, the glass froze halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face. "I came to return some things," I said, and Galatea upended the sack onto his desk. Silver tumbled out, still gagged, still unconscious. Beside the spy, captured battle tokens from Kyle's forces, the insignia of the Second Prince's personal guard, the contract scrolls with Azure Trading Company seals, and the detailed financial records Edward's people had intercepted. Every coin Raymond had paid, every mercenary he had hired, every message he had sent. Raymond started talking. He claimed ignorance, claimed Kyle had threatened him, claimed he had no choice. Every excuse contradicted the last. By the time he stopped, even the silence was embarrassing. "You hired a dragon tamer to burn my village," I said. "You funded a prince's army with your company's gold. You planted a spy in my home. 4 of my people are dead because of decisions you made from this chair." I drew the gun from my belt. Raymond tried to move. His legs did not cooperate. I raised the barrel and fired a single shot into the wall behind his head. The sound was enormous in that small office. Plaster dust rained onto his shoulders. Raymond's bladder surrendered before his mouth did, and then his mouth surrendered too. A man walked in, late 40s, silver-haired, dressed sharply. He stepped over the spilled wine with the careful dignity of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "I am Kaiser," he said, inclining his head toward me, "Vice President of the Azure Trading Company. I deeply apologize for the actions of Raymond. His conspiracy with Prince Kyle was conducted without the knowledge or approval of the company's senior leadership." Behind him, Edward closed the door. The two of them had arranged this in advance. I had suspected, now I was certain. Kaiser produced a stack of documents, evidence carefully gathered of every unauthorized transaction Raymond had approved. He laid them on the desk beside the captured battle tokens, like a lawyer presenting exhibits. Raymond, shaking on the floor, tried to lunge toward Kaiser. He managed 2 steps before his legs gave out again. He tried to speak, to threaten, to beg, to bargain. Kaiser did not look at him. "From this moment," Kaiser said, "the Azure Trading Company is under new leadership. Raymond will be removed. His assets will be seized. We will pay full compensation for the damages to your territory. And as a gesture of our sincerity," he reached into his coat and produced a small, ornate wooden box. "I have heard you collect relics from the Age of Solomon. This has been in my personal collection for some years. I hope you will accept it." I opened the box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a fragment of machinery. Gears, pistons, something that looked like it belonged to a world that understood physics the way I did. The World Library stirred at the edge of my awareness, recognizing something. The box closed in my hand. Kaiser met my gaze steadily. A pragmatist, not a loyalist. He would serve me because I had won, not because he believed in me. That was fine. Pragmatists are predictable. "Edward will handle the terms," I said. "You will hear from him within the week." I turned to the door. Behind me, Raymond was still on the floor, his silk coat stained, his gold rings meaningless, his monopoly shattered, his protector in a prison cell with a crippled arm. Everything he had built to insulate himself from consequences had failed in the space of 10 minutes. At the threshold, I paused. Not for him. For me. What I felt was nothing. Raymond was not a villain. He was a coward who had gambled on someone else's army and lost. He had never set foot in Asgard. He had never seen the faces of the people his money had tried to kill. The rage was not for him. The rage was for the 4 names I could not stop hearing. Raymond was just the invoice. I walked out. Edward would handle the rest. He was better at contracts than I was, and contracts were all Raymond deserved. We returned to Asgard in the late afternoon. The party had never really stopped. It had simply evolved from desperate drinking into something gentler. People sitting in doorways sharing food, children chasing each other between the rebuilding crews. I joined the celebration for an hour, told people the Azure situation was handled. They cheered, but the cheer had a weight to it. The heavy relief of people who had survived something they should not have had to face. Diana was there, still in her battle gear, still watching doors. I caught her eye across the room. She held my gaze a beat longer than usual, then looked away. Later, I found Neil asleep in a corner, his head on his sister's shoulder. I left them alone. Diana came to my room after the party quieted. She had changed out of her armor, just a blue tunic, her hair loose, the gun blade left somewhere else for the first time in days. She stood in the doorway assessing weak points. "You have not slept," she said. "I am fine. You are a terrible liar." She sat on the edge of the bed. I was standing by the window, staring at the village square below, where a few oil lamps still burned and 2 militia members walked patrol. "Say it," Diana said. "Whatever you have been carrying since the battle, say it to me." I did not turn around. My hands were on the windowsill, and I was aware, suddenly, of how thin the wall was between functioning and not functioning. "I built the weapons," I said. "I planned the defense. I gave the orders. And 4 people." The sentence broke. It just stopped, mid-thought, like a bridge with no other side. 4 people are dead because I decided to fight instead of surrender. I chose that. Me, the useless prince who was supposed to build a peaceful territory. I built guns and walls, and I told people to stand behind them, and 4 of them are never coming home. My voice cracked. Then it cracked again. And then whatever mechanism had been holding me together since Neil said the number 4 simply gave out, like a dam hit by 1 drop too many. She was already there. Her hand found the space between my shoulder blades, warm and steady and not asking me to stop. "I keep hearing their names," I said, and the words were coming out wrong, too fast, stumbling over each other. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. If I had finished the second cannon, if I had posted more guards on the eastern wall, if I had just..." Grace. Her voice was quiet, just my name, spoken simply, like it was the only word that mattered. She turned me around. My face was wet and I could not remember when that had started. She pulled my head down to her shoulder and held on. She did not tell me it was not my fault. She did not tell me the four would have wanted me to be strong. She just held me while I fell apart, and the silence between us was the most honest thing either of us had ever shared. I cried. The useless prince, the Lord of Asgard. I stood in my own bedroom and cried into the shoulder of the only person I trusted enough to see me like this. I said their names, all four. I said them into the fabric of her tunic, and I felt her arms tighten every time. Not to silence me, but to tell me she was still there, still listening, still not running from whatever this was. My father would have called this weakness. My brothers would have called it pathetic. But Diana had known me since before I was anyone, and she had never once confused softness for lack of spine. It lasted a long time, or maybe it did not. Time does strange things when you are not pretending anymore. When it finally slowed, she did not let go. We stood there in the lamplight, breathing, and the distance between Lord and Knight closed into something that did not need a title. She tilted her head up. I looked down. Her violet eyes were steady and clear, and not afraid of anything she saw in mine. "You are not your father," she said. "You built something worth protecting. The four who died knew that. They stood because they believed in what you built. Do not take that from them by calling it your failure." I did not have an answer. I kissed her instead, and the night went quiet around us. We overslept. Galatea was waiting in the dining hall with a smile that should not have been possible on metal. Noelle had set the table with suspicious precision, 2 places, side by side, with the good plates. "Good morning, master," Galatea said. "And good morning, Diana. I trust you both rested well." Diana's face went through every shade of red the human body can produce. She sat down very quickly and stared at the table as if breakfast was the most fascinating thing she had ever encountered. "I have prepared a special breakfast today," Noelle said, not quite meeting our eyes. "Celebratory rice." Galatea tilted her head. "In certain otherworld traditions, celebratory red rice is served to mark significant occasions." "Galatea," I said. "Yes, master?" "Stop." "Of course, master." The smile did not change by a single degree. Noelle giggled into her sleeve. Diana kicked me under the table, which I deserved for reasons I was not going to examine in public. The rice was actually good. Sunlight came through the windows at an angle that made the whole hall golden, and for the first time since the battle, Asgard felt like a place people lived in, not a place people survived. After breakfast, I opened the wooden box Kaiser had given me. The fragment sat in my palm, and the world library opened. Steam, pressure, thermal energy converted into mechanical work, an engine that turned heat into motion. This world ran on magic and muscle. I had neither, but I had heat, water, and the knowledge to make them do the work of 100 men. The grief was not gone, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a weight that crushed. It was a weight I carried, the way a blacksmith carries the knowledge that his hammer can build or destroy. I chose to build. Outside, someone laughed, a real laugh, the careless kind that comes from a person who feels safe enough to make noise. Diana looked up and the corner of her mouth twitched. "So," she said, "what are you inventing today?" The humor came back, tentative, warmer than before, changed. I held up the fragment. "Something that runs on steam." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Probably." Noelle leaned in, eyes bright. Somewhere outside, Wallace was already hammering, the steady rhythm of a dwarf who did not need to be told that the world was still turning. Asgard was scarred. Asgard was grieving. Asgard was 24 people and a robot, and a territory that most maps did not bother to label. But we were still here, and tomorrow we would build. Peace had a sound, and I was still learning it. A month had passed since the battle with Kyle, and the silence that followed was not the silence of loss. It was the silence of things growing. Outside, hammers on wood, voices calling across the construction site, the low rumble of Wallace working on something he would probably set on fire before lunch. My desk told a different story. Letters from nobles I had never met, invitations to courts I had never visited. Everyone started with the same line: "We have long admired your efforts in Asgard. You have 14 letters requiring responses today, master," Galatea said, setting tea at my elbow. 3 from baronial houses, 2 from merchant guilds, and 1 from the Cassius family. The Cassius letter should be opened first. I picked it up. The seal was heavy, the paper expensive. Inside was a polite suggestion to meet their daughter, with an apology for past events I barely remembered. I wrote a polite refusal and moved on to the next stack. The territory was changing faster than my handwriting could keep up. Noelle and Wallace had built a working steam pump, draining the groundwater that flooded our mines. The crops thrived. Our guards could now handle beasts without Diana standing over their shoulders. Asgard was becoming something real, and that was the problem. Real things attract real attention. Diana and I walked through the village that afternoon. Patrols that were really just walks, danger reduced to a formality. The villagers waved. Sarah gave us sandwiches and a smile that said she was already composing gossip. Diana ate hers without looking at me, but her shoulders stayed against mine the entire walk. "You have been staring at paperwork for 3 days," she said. "Someone has to. Someone has to eat lunch too." She bit into her apple. "Wallace almost blew up the workshop again this morning." I laughed, genuinely laughed. It felt strange how easy that had become. We stopped at the new bathhouse, built from stone and ultramithril, temperature stones that actually worked now after weeks of prototypes that either froze the water solid or boiled it. We had built a place where people could sit in warm water and not worry about what was coming to kill them next. "It is a good village," Diana said quietly. I did not answer. I just took her hand and we kept walking. The letter I had refused did not stay refused. 2 days later, a carriage rolled up to the mansion gates, carrying someone I had not seen since I was a child. Eleanor Cassius stepped out with golden hair, blue eyes, and a small mechanical bird perched on her shoulder. My former fiancé candidate from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "Long time no see," she said, smiling like she had been expected. "I heard you were looking for someone who can handle documents and use magic. How about me?" I looked at Galatea. Galatea looked at me. "She shows strong curiosity and excitement," Galatea said quietly. "No harmful intent. Her primary interest appears to be me." That explained the sound Eleanor had made when she first saw Galatea. A strangled noise halfway between a gasp and a squeal, the kind of sound a person makes when they see the thing they have spent their entire life studying, standing in front of them wearing a maid outfit. Eleanor was a golem maker. Her skill was called Golem Creator. Galatea was the most advanced construct she had ever seen, and Eleanor intended to study her for as long as I would let her. I used the World Library to check her background and kept Galatea monitoring her emotions for the first week, but Eleanor earned her place fast. Her golems, built from Wallace's ultramithril alloy, hauled stone, dug foundations, and did the heavy labor that had been breaking our backs for months. Within weeks, she was indispensable. I told Diana about Eleanor that evening. She listened without expression, which was never a good sign. "She is useful," Diana said. "She is, and she wants to stay." Yes, Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over, pulled my collar aside, and kissed my neck hard enough to leave a mark. She straightened my shirt, smoothed it flat, and stood up. "Good," she said, and walked out. I touched the spot on my neck and decided not to ask questions. Diana understood politics better than she let on. Eleanor's presence meant the Cassius family's protection. A faction of nobles who believed the kingdom needed reform now had a reason to watch over Asgard. The party was Eleanor's idea, and it was the right one. We invited nobles and merchants from across the region. Edward handled the commercial guests. Wallace wore formal clothes and looked like he wanted to die. I stood at the entrance with Diana on my left in a red dress and Eleanor on my right in blue. Diana had arranged this deliberately. 2 women flanking the Lord of Asgard told every noble in attendance that marriage proposals were not welcome. It worked. The offers stopped before they started. Nobles tasted the magic recovery potatoes and could not believe a tuber could restore what expensive potions barely managed. Merchants examined the ultramithril alloy and began calculating profit margins. Then Robert Cassius arrived, Eleanor's father, the man who controlled the faction of nobles who actually mattered in this kingdom. He entered like a man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around him. He greeted me as Prince Grace in front of every noble present, and the room recalibrated in real time. Whispered conversations stopped. Dismissive expressions became attentive. A single word from Robert Cassius had done what months of invention could not. He left me a jeweled box with a note inside. He wanted to talk privately. We spoke alone after the party. Galatea stood outside the door, monitoring. faltering. Robert did not waste time. He told me the king had noticed my victory over Kyle. Factions in the capital were already moving. Some wanted to back me as a successor. Others wanted to use me. And my father, the man who had thrown me away, was already acting. A summons is coming, Robert said. Your response to it will determine your future and Asgard's. I asked him what he wanted from me. He asked me what I intended for Asgard. I told him the truth. I hated a kingdom that measured worth by combat power alone. I wanted to build a place where people could live without being disposable, where the things I created were used to protect, not to conquer, where someone like Noelle, who could not swing a sword but could build a steam engine, had as much value as someone like Diana, who could cut through a battalion. Robert listened. Then he nodded. Please take care of Eleanor, he said. In return, my faction supports Asgard. I offered him a gun as a gift. He accepted it with the gravity of a man who understood exactly what he was holding. After he left, Galatea pointed out that his phrasing sounded like a father entrusting his daughter to a future husband. I told her to stop smiling. The steam car arrived on a Tuesday, and I almost missed it. Noelle had been working with Wallace for weeks on something she refused to show me. In the courtyard sat a metal box on 4 wheels with a chimney belching white smoke. It looked like someone had welded a furnace to a flatbed cart and dared it to move. It moved. Noelle had built the world's first horseless carriage because Asgard did not have enough horses, and she was tired of carrying her brother home after training. The engine ran on fire magic stones boiling water into steam. I named it a steam automobile. Noelle had named it after me, which I vetoed immediately. Diana drove it the way she did everything, with terrifying confidence and zero patience for the road's opinion. We rattled through the village, vibrations shaking my teeth loose, and I held onto the rail and grinned like a child. You look ridiculous, Diana said, not slowing down. This is the greatest thing I have ever built. You did not build it. I built the territory that built the person who built it. That counts. She almost smiled. Almost. The letter came while we were testing the car. Diana read it. Her face went still the way it did before she hit something. Your father wants to discuss the development of Asgard, she said, her voice flat. He is summoning you to the capital. I watched her jaw tighten. She suggested, with complete sincerity, that we sneak into the capital with Galatea and solve the problem permanently. I expected this, I said. She looked at me. The anger did not leave her eyes, but something softer moved behind it. I know, she said. That is what makes me furious. You expected it, and you are still going. Refusing a royal summons would give my father legal grounds to declare Asgard rebellious. The only way to fight him was inside his own system, using his own rules, with allies he did not know I had. Diana listened. She did not agree, but she stopped suggesting assassination. We left on a clear morning with Asgard behind us and the capital ahead. Chris had prepared a carriage so luxurious it hurt to look at. Eleanor had mounted a small golem shaped like my statue on top of the steam car. She told me, cheerfully, that it could shoot fire from its mouth and lightning from its eyes. I told her to never speak of it again. Eleanor would manage the territory in my absence. Asgard was strong enough to stand without me now. That fact settled in my chest with something between pride and fear. At the gate, Eleanor held out her little finger. Promise you will come back, she said. I linked my finger with hers. I promise. Diana watched this from the car. She did not say anything, but when I climbed in beside her, she took my hand and held it so tightly the bones creaked. The steam car rolled forward. The carriage followed. Behind us, the village shrank until it was just a smudge of smoke and rooftops against the morning sky. Ahead, the capital waited. My father waited. The place that had called me useless and thrown me away now wanted me back, because the things I had built were too valuable to ignore. I was not the same boy they had exiled, and I had 4 graves behind me that reminded me what failure cost. The road to the capital was long. I did not look back. The rubber tires and Wallace's suspension turned what used to be a spine-cracking journey into something almost pleasant. Diana drove. Galatea watched the forest with the calm precision of someone cataloging every leaf. It lasted until the mountain pass. Carriages jammed the narrow road. A boulder the size of a small house blocked the way forward. A knight in polished mithril armor was shouting at the gatekeeper, demanding the road be cleared. One of George's personal guard, the same man who used to call me a waste of royal blood while I studied. He ignored every warning about the wyverns nesting in the pass since the old dragon had been removed, took his escort, and marched straight into the monster-infested stretch like arrogance was armor. He is going to die in there, Galatea said, with the tone of someone commenting on the weather. Diana's hand was already on her gunblade. She looked at me. me. The question in her eyes was not whether we should help. It was whether I would enjoy it. I would. We found them pinned against a cliff face, 3 wyverns circling overhead, the knights unable to do a thing about it because swords do not reach creatures that fly. Their leader stood in the center of the formation, shield raised, barking orders that no one could follow because the situation had moved past the point where orders mattered. I pulled the gun from my belt and fired. The shot clipped a wyvern's wing and sent it spiraling into the rocks. Not the clean hit I wanted, but it got their attention. Galatea moved next. One of the wyverns dove straight at her. She caught it by the jaw and kicked its skull in with a single strike. The sound echoed off the mountain walls like a cannon shot. Diana finished the last one. Her gunblade flared with light, the magic and steel working together, and the wyvern detonated from the inside out before it could pull up from its dive. The rest scattered. Silence fell over the pass like a blanket. The knight stared at us, his mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You are welcome," I said. He demanded to know what weapons we carried, what power this was. Then he tried to claim the right of way, arguing that since the boulder still blocked the road, whoever cleared it would go first. Galatea walked over to the boulder. She set her hands against it, braced, and lifted. The rock rose off the ground like it weighed nothing. She tossed it off the edge of the pass. It tumbled down the mountainside and crashed into the ravine below. Diana stepped close to the knight. She used to spar with him back at the castle. 6 wins out of 10, she told me once. And that was before the gunblade. "This is what grace gave me," she said. "Want to try your luck now?" He did not. We drove through first. The capital looked the same. That was the worst part. Every stone, every guard post, every banner, unchanged. As if the city had been preserved in amber, while I built a world from nothing 200 miles away. They did not recognize me. Diana handled it. She stopped the steam car, stepped out, and addressed the nearest guard by name. He flinched. Then he saw the crest on the vehicle, and his face went through 3 stages: confusion, recognition, and poorly concealed fear. "Your own prince," Diana said, and the temperature around her voice dropped by several degrees. "And you forgot his face." They let us through without another word. Inside the castle, Galatea leaned close. Interest, surprise, curiosity. She listed the emotions she was reading. And underneath all of it, fear. Not of you, of the king. Everyone in this castle is afraid of the same thing. Nothing had changed. I had. A servant knocked. The audience was ready. The throne room was exactly as I remembered it. My father sat on the throne, watching me approach with the expression of a man examining something mildly interesting on his desk. George stood to his right, arms crossed, the same contemptuous posture he had worn since we were children. I stopped at the proper distance, bowed, not deep. "It has been a while," the king said. He listed my accomplishments the way a merchant lists inventory, without emotion, without pride, purely as an assessment of value. Then he got to the point. He proposed mass-producing my guns. The kingdom's army would be equipped with them. I would receive land and a higher title in return. The man who had told me I was not worth keeping, now asking for the things I had built after he threw me away. No, the word hung in the air. George's expression shifted from boredom to fury. The king's did not change at all, which was worse. I told him the weapons were mine, Asgard's, that if anyone attempted to seize them, I would sell the technology to every neighboring nation that wanted it. I would arm the enemies of this kingdom before I let the man who exiled me profit from my work. George stormed forward, shouting that I was nothing without Solomon's relics, that I should hand over the guns and crawl back to my wasteland. Diana's hand found her gunblade. I put my arm out to stop her. "You want my weapons?" I said to George. "Give me your sword arms, both of them. That is the exchange rate." He went silent. The king, for the first time, looked genuinely amused. Then my father did what he always did. He pivoted. He told us both that he had a task, a competition. The neighboring kingdom of Dwell, Wallace's homeland, was under siege by mine ants. Their mithril deposits were overrun. The dwarves were suffering. Whichever brother succeeded in saving Dwell would earn the right to command the other. George accepted immediately. He did not care about the dwarves. He cared about winning. I accepted too, not because of the competition. Wallace had mentioned Dwell exactly once, with the voice of a man who had made peace with never going home. His homeland was dying. I was going to Dwell whether my father ordered it or not. George mentioned he had a secret weapon. He said it with the smirk of a man who believed he held the winning hand. I let him believe it. The spy I had fed false information to had delivered an old model gun to George's people. Whatever he thought he had was already obsolete. We left the throne room. Diana was vibrating with restrained fury. "He is using you," Diana said once we were in the corridor. "I know, and you are letting him, for now." I had one more stop. the royal treasury. The king had granted me access, a rare concession. The vault was magnificent. Gold, silver, weapons, artifacts from a dozen eras. I moved through slowly, looking for anything the world library might respond to. I found a device that looked like a gun. My hand was reaching for it when a voice stopped me. A woman, hooded, her face hidden behind dark fabric. She claimed to be the vault manager. She knew my name without being told. She led me past the weapon to a large metal wheel sitting on a stone pedestal. A locomotive wheel, she explained, made by dwarves attempting to replicate Solomon's technology. A copy, not an original. I touched it. The world library activated. Steam locomotive, wheel assembly, transmission ratios, boiler pressure calculations. Even a replica was enough to trigger the skill. Not just Solomon's originals, but anything built in imitation of his designs. The woman watched me with an expression I could not read beneath the hood. She offered to have the wheel transported to Asgard if I wanted it. I asked to see the rest, the other relics. She refused. If I saw everything, she said, I would have no reason to keep working for the kingdom. That sentence told me more than she intended. She knew the world library activated on sight or touch. I had never explained that to anyone. I asked who she was. She deflected. A disease kept her face hidden. Then she wished me well, and I felt the conversation end like a door closing. When I looked back, she was gone. Outside, the vault door was locked. The guard said no one had been inside. Galatea confirmed the same. Someone in this kingdom knew what I could do and how I did it. Someone who could bypass Galatea's sensors and vanish from a locked room. I filed it away, in the part of my mind where I kept the things that might kill me later. Galatea warned me before I saw her. A woman approaching with complex emotions, guilt, sorrow, and underneath it all, something that might have been hatred. Tia, Kyle's maid. She greeted me with a polite smile that did not touch her eyes. She asked if I knew what had happened to Kyle. He had left the capital months ago, she said, claiming he was going on an inspection. He never came back. I told her what I could, that an adventurer matching Kyle's description had attacked my territory, that my soldiers had engaged him, that he had fled on a wyvern and been shot down, that his body was never recovered. She listened. Her smile did not waver. She thanked me politely, bowed, and walked away. I heard crying before she turned the corner. Galatea touched my arm. What you did was not wrong, she said. I did not regret defending my home, but standing in that corridor, listening to a woman cry for a man I had helped destroy, the line between righteous and ruthless felt thinner than I liked. We left that evening. Diana had visited old friends while I was in the treasury. Galatea reported she had returned flushed and flustered. I made the mistake of teasing her about it. One more word, she said, without looking back, and I will drive this car into a ditch. I believed her. The lightness faded. Mine ants, creatures that lived underground, ate minerals, grew hard as the metal they consumed. An army of them had overrun the mithril deposits in Dwell. We needed new weapons, new approaches, a month of preparation, maybe less, depending on how quickly George moved. I thought about Wallace. His homeland was the place we had been ordered to save. He had made peace with exile years ago, the way people make peace with things that still hurt when they breathe too deep. This would crack that peace wide open. We will figure it out, Diana said. Her hand found mine between the seats. That was enough. I came home to chaos. 2 golems were racing a steam car through the square, while half the town placed bets. Eleanor had turned Asgard into a carnival, but there was no time. I called Wallace and Noelle to the workshop and told them everything. The competition with George, the mine ants, Dwell. Wallace went quiet when I said the name. Not angry, not sad, just quiet, in the way a man goes quiet when someone mentions the place he left behind and never stopped thinking about. I asked if making weapons for this mission felt like revenge. He laughed at me, not bitterly either. A real laugh, warm and rough. These are not for revenge, he said. These are so you can protect my homeland. He told me he did not regret leaving. He did not regret Asgard, but someday, when the fighting was done, he wanted to walk me through his country, show me the forges where he learned his craft, the taverns where dwarves drank fire liquor instead of water, the things worth saving. I would like that, I said, and I meant it. He had already been designing. A long rifle barrel lay across his workbench, surrounded by gunpowder calculations. Noelle was sketching beside him, her pencil moving faster than her mouth could explain. I opened the world library and searched for mine ants. The results made my stomach drop. These creatures ate mithril ore and incorporated it into their shells. Normal steel bounced off them. Normal bullets dented nothing. Their only weak points were the eyes and the joints of their mandibles, and those were small targets on creatures that moved fast in the dark. work. We needed something new. Over the next 2 weeks, Wallace and Noel built the magic rifle together. A human and a dwarf, arguing over barrel thickness and powder ratios like it was the most natural thing in the world. The rifle fired super mithril alloy rounds, propelled by both gunpowder and a magical explosion at the same instant. A normal rifle barely scratched the target plate. The magic rifle punched clean through. Adrian watched the test shot and said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, she said that if this weapon had existed a few years ago, Dwell might have been saved. She was a former noble of Dwell, barely into her 20s, hiding a grief she did not name. Her partner Gil was a dwarf who pretended to care about nothing except alcohol. I hired them both to train my guards and guide us through their homeland. Gil asked if the contract included free drinks. He signed before I finished saying yes. Noel's masterpiece came last, the flower gun, a shotgun mounted on the steam car that fired a spread of pellets. Mine ants were fast and their vital spots were small. A single bullet might miss. A cloud of pellets would not. When Neil pulled the trigger in the mine during our wyvern hunt, every target shredded. 5 wyverns, 2 shots. The flower gun turned them into proof of concept in under a minute. I patted Noelle on the head and watched her smile. Then I caught myself worrying. She was building weapons of war. Wallace noticed the look on my face and whispered that she was tougher than I thought. She named it the flower gun because the pellets bloomed outward like petals. A beautiful name for an ugly thing. The last piece was the steam tank. The World Library gave me caterpillar tracks, continuous treads instead of wheels, designed for rubble and uneven mine floors. Wallace built them onto a compact 2-seat vehicle with a cannon barrel, small enough for tunnels. We had magic rifles, the flower gun, and a tank that could crawl through hell. Eve, Eleanor's former magic teacher, arrived to train my guards in basic enchanting. Within a week, 5 of them could channel magic into their weapons. Asgard was ready. The expedition set out with steam cars, horse carriages, and 30 guards. Robert had sent supplies: horses, dried meat, wine, water. Diana drove the lead car. Galatea flew overhead carrying crates. I knew George had planted a spy among my guards. Robert had warned me. I let the man stay. A spy you know about is a channel you control. Galatea landed beside me and said she sensed something ahead. Not goblins, something heavier. Gil confirmed it through his earth magic. He could feel footprints through the ground. Whatever was ahead weighed far more than a human. We found an overturned carriage surrounded by stone armadillos. Mine creatures covered in scales, hard enough to shatter arrows. They had no business being this far from the mines. Something underground was pushing them out. I told Adrian and Gil to use the magic rifles. They moved like people who had trained together for years, 2 shots each. The armadillos dropped. Scales that would have laughed at a normal blade had holes the size of fists punched clean through them. Under the wreckage, we found a young woman barely conscious, Miranda, the village chief's daughter. Adrian recognized her instantly and spoke softly in a language I did not understand. Miranda opened her eyes, saw familiar faces, and passed out from relief. Adrian rode in the steam car with Miranda's head in her lap. I asked her about Dwell. What I heard was worse than I expected. Dwell had been a place where humans and dwarves lived side by side. Dwarves crafted mithril. Humans traded it. They exchanged their children between families to build trust across the species line. Adrian herself had grown up in a dwarf household. She still remembered the first night when her host family made her drink fire liquor after a bath, and she passed out cold. Then my father won the war. He demanded mithril. He demanded dwarves. He stripped the mines of their workforce and left both communities too weak to defend themselves. The mine ants multiplied because there was no one left to cull them. The humans blamed the dwarves. The dwarves blamed the humans. Adrian pulled out a necklace, 2 gems, one carved as a human hand and one as a dwarf hand, clasped together. She told me she only hated my country a little. A fair war was a fair war, but the demands afterward had been something else. I asked her why she joined my expedition if she felt that way. She looked out the window at the forest thinning ahead and said she was not sure. Maybe a faint hope that someone from the country that broke Dwell might be the one to fix it. The trees opened, and below us, carved into the base of a mountain so massive its peak vanished into cloud, was the mine of Dwell. The village looked the way Asgard had looked before I arrived. Worse, maybe. Overgrown fields choked with weeds, empty houses with dark windows. Women and elderly and children moved through the dirt streets, but almost no young men. They had all been sent to the mines to fight aunts. A dwarf girl, maybe 10 years old, tugged at my sleeve. She asked if I was a soldier and if I had anything to eat, not begging, asking, matter of fact, like it was a reasonable question to ask a stranger because nobody in the village had enough. I crouched down and gave her the cookies Noelle and Noah had packed. She ate them so fast I was afraid she would choke. I told her I thought things would get better soon. She nodded, wiped crumbs from her chin, and ran back to a group of women who watched me with the flat, exhausted eyes of people who had stopped expecting help. Diana watched the whole thing with her jaw tight. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The village chief met us at his house, a human, not a dwarf, which surprised me until I remembered that Dwell had been a place where both races shared everything. He thanked me for saving Miranda and apologized that he could not offer us food. They had liquor and empty houses. That was all. I told him we came to help, not to take. Then I asked how bad the food situation really was. Adrian added that dwarves needed enormous amounts of food to maintain their strength. Without it, their bodies weakened. Their magic faded. The workers in the mines were starving while they fought, growing weaker by the day against enemies that only grew harder. I had brought potatoes and hoes and fertilizer made from monster remains that could force a harvest in a single day. Diana stared at me when I unloaded the crates from the steam car. She told me I had a terrible face, the kind I wore when I was scheming. She was not wrong. I was not doing this purely out of kindness. Every potato I planted in Dwell was a seed of trade, a reason for dwarven craftsmen to remember the name Asgard. My father had taken from Dwell with soldiers. I would take with food. The method was different. The instinct, if I was honest with myself, was uncomfortably similar. But the kindness was real too. That girl had been hungry. Her whole village was hungry. And I had a steam car full of the answer. I planted them the afternoon we arrived. By morning, green shoots had already broken through the soil. The fertilizer did its work the way it always did, fast and almost miraculous. Miranda crouched beside the rows and ran her fingers across the sprouts. She looked at her father with tears in her eyes and said they would not have to go on dangerous hunts anymore. The chief stared at the green shoots pushing through dirt that had been bare 12 hours ago and asked what he owed me. Nothing, I told him. These were a gift for the hospitality and the liquor. If any dwarves ever wanted to come work in Asgard, he should send them my way. Diana leaned in and clarified to the chief that what I actually wanted was dwarven craftsmanship, not dwarven women. I appreciated the save. That evening, we steamed potatoes in a massive pot and fed the entire village. Galatea fried thin sliced ones in oil using a recipe from Solomon's World, crispy and golden and salted. She told me it was a dish Solomon's father used to eat in his homeland. She seemed happy that I was the first person in this world to taste it. When I announced the fried potatoes went well with alcohol, a stampede of dwarves nearly flattened me. Gil and Neil ended up dancing without shirts by the bonfire, while Diana chased them with the flat of her blade. The village women were laughing. The children were eating. One of the old dwarf men was singing something in a language I did not know, and another one was crying into his cup and calling it allergies. I stood at the edge of the firelight and watched humans and dwarves sharing food that had not existed in this village a day ago. Adrian appeared beside me. Her eyes were wet. "It looks like how Dwell used to be," she said, "before everything went wrong." I did not answer. I just stood there, watching a village come back to life over potatoes and fire liquor. And I thought about how my father could have done this. Could have sent food instead of soldiers. Could have built instead of broken. It would have cost him so much less. The morning after the feast, Adrian and Gil knocked on the steam car window. They asked to speak privately, not as my contracted hires, as former nobles of Dwell. I let them in. Adrian's face was different from the polite professional mask she usually wore, something heavier. Gil, who never seemed serious about anything, was not smiling either. They had something to tell me about the politics of this kingdom, something I would need to know before I met the two kings. I told them to talk. Whatever it was, I would listen. Two kings ruled Dwell. The human king sat in the castle above. The dwarf king lived in the mountain below. The human king was expecting George. He was not expecting me. The throne room was beautiful in the way abandoned things are beautiful. High ceilings, carved pillars, tapestries that had not been cleaned in years. No dwarves walked these halls. The king was a heavy man in expensive clothes, sitting on a chair that dwarven hands had carved for a better ruler. He looked at me the way my father looked at me. He asked when George would arrive. I told him I was not George's advance party. I was Grace Vermilion, Lord of Asgard, and I had come with weapons that could pierce mine ant armor. He sighed loud enough to echo off the ceiling. He had hoped for the Sword Saint, not the Knowledge Prince. He waved his hand and told me I could do whatever I liked. Diana suggested we destroy this country. I told her to save it for the mine ants. I was used to this. A king who measured worth by combat power. I knew the playbook. I asked for one thing: permission to move freely through the city. He granted it without thinking. He had just given me a key to every dwarf in his kingdom and did not realize it. Adrian led us to the other king, a tunnel carved into the base of the mountain, marked with a sign that said, "Humans were not welcome." Adrian walked past it without hesitating. Two drunk dwarves operated the elevator. One tried to lick Galatia's arm to identify what metal she was made of. Galatia declined politely. I focused on not throwing up. Two figures walked ahead of us. A dwarf girl, barely taller than my waist, wearing a maid outfit and humming to herself, and a one-armed man in a mask. I knew him before he turned around. The build was different, thinner, but I knew the way he moved. Kyle turned. The mask could not hide the shock in his eyes. Galatia sensed my anger before I did. She leaned close and whispered that we were in a foreign country and that the audience with the dwarf king came first. She was right. I unclenched my fist. The dwarf girl broke the silence. She bounced over with a grin that could have lit the entire underground and introduced herself as Ruby, daughter of the king, apparently. She wore a maid outfit because she worked at a food stall in the city, a princess who served bread for a living. Something about that made my chest tight. She introduced the masked man as Cain, a wanderer with no memory who had been rescued and now served as her guard. He bowed to me and said it was nice to meet me. I looked him in the eye and said likewise. Then I added that if he ever remembered anything, he should let me know, because a foolish mage had once destroyed my territory, and I would love to find out what happened to him. Ruby missed the subtext entirely. She told Cain that I seemed like a good person and that he should relax. The dwarf king Harold sat at the head of a round table in splendid armor that caught the torchlight like liquid gold. Ruby took the seat at his left, and Kyle stood behind her like a shadow. Harold stood and bowed. A king, bowing to me. He thanked me for taking care of Wallace. He called Wallace a treasure of the dwarven people. Harold smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Then Harold told me the truth. His kingdom was dying. The mine ants had overrun the mithril mines. Without mithril, the dwarves had no income. Without income, they could not buy food. They were surviving by selling old creations, weapons, and tools made by the previous generation, but that supply was running out. The human king above did nothing. He wanted soldiers, not solutions. Harold's voice stayed steady through all of it, a king holding the ceiling up with dignity while the walls crumbled around him. He asked me to accept dwarven immigrants into Asgard. The room went silent. I looked at Galatia. She nodded. He was telling the truth. Harold offered everything he had left: the remaining mithril, his best smiths and miners, his kingdom's knowledge and craft. In exchange, his people would live. He bowed again, deeper this time, and his forehead nearly touched the table. Ruby's voice cracked. She had not known this part. She called out to her father and asked when he had decided this. Harold did not answer her. He told me that he would stay behind and fight the mine ants himself. He would send his people to safety and die in his mines if that was what it took. Ruby turned to Kyle and begged him to do something, to fight the ants, to save the kingdom. Kyle's voice was flat. He said he could not do it alone. I stood up. I told Harold I would not discuss immigration until the mine ants were dealt with. Galatia reached into her pack and placed two things on the table: a magic rifle and a sack of potatoes. Harold stared at the rifle. He asked me how I knew about guns. I told him Asgard had reinvented them. He said that long ago, dwarves had visited Solomon's Asgard and received a gun as a gift. That gun had inspired half the technology in Dwell, including the elevator that had nearly killed my stomach. He looked at me and called me Solomon's successor. Then he bowed a third time and asked me to save his kingdom. I told him to leave it to me. I needed materials on the mine ants, a workshop, and his best engineers. We were going to mass produce these weapons. Ruby volunteered to guide us into the mines. Her father tried to stop her. She told him she would not sit safely above while foreigners risked their lives for her country. Harold looked at her the way fathers look at daughters who have already made up their minds. He let her go. She dragged Kyle along. The look he gave me could have curdled milk. I felt the same way. The mine was enormous. Ruby walked ahead, chattering about the old days when dwarves competed to find the biggest mithril chunk, and the winner bought drinks for everyone. Her voice echoed off walls that had not heard laughter in a long time. Kyle pointed out faint tracks in a side passage. Ant prints. Galatea confirmed 3 presences ahead. I pulled my gun and told everyone to stay close. We found them in a chamber barely wide enough for the 4 of us. 3 mine ants the size of large dogs, hunched over a dead stone armadillo, mandibles crunching through scales like paper. Their carapaces gleamed with the dull sheen of mithril. I fired. The bullet bounced off the nearest ant's shell and ricocheted into the wall. Ruby moved. She raised the magic rifle I had given her and fired twice. The first shot shattered a front leg. The ant stumbled. The second shot hit the head. It dropped and did not move. Galatea ripped the second one apart with her bare hands. Kyle burned the third with a burst of fire magic, the incantation rolling off his tongue with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times down here. I knelt beside the dead ant and placed my hand on its carapace. The world library opened. Data flooded in. These creatures ate minerals and incorporated mithril into their shells. They felt no pain. They existed to serve a queen, kill the queen, and the colony collapsed, but threaten the queen and every ant in the mine would swarm. I had a strategy now, and I had a problem. Kyle asked to speak with me alone. Ruby and Galatea waited around the corner. Galatea whispered to me that she sensed no hostility from him. I kept my hand on my gun anyway. He removed the mask. I had expected the face. I had not expected what it did to me. The arrogant prince who had stood on a hill and ordered his army to burn my village was gone. This was someone who had lost everything and been rebuilt by whatever was left. He told me the dragon tamer had found him after the battle and brought him to dwell. He could not return to the capital. George would have him killed. The kingdom considered him dead. He had wandered until he collapsed, starving in the streets of the underground city. A girl in a maid outfit had found him and offered him bread. Ruby. Of course it was Ruby. He told me he had been trash. He said the word without flinching. He had wanted their father's approval so badly that he never stopped to think about the people he trampled. He understood now. Then he dropped to his knees. He said he would follow any command I gave. If I told him to eat dirt, he would eat it. If I told him to put on a maid outfit and serve bread beside Ruby, he would do it gladly. His voice broke on the last part. Just protect this place, he said. Protect Ruby's smile. That is all I am asking. I stared at my brother kneeling in the dirt, begging for the same thing I had begged our father for. A home, people worth protecting. Part of me wanted to pull the trigger. Part of me wanted to pull him up. Neither one won. Adrian's voice echoed down the corridor, calling my name. The dwarves were looking for us. I turned and walked back. Kyle put his mask on and followed. I was grateful for the interruption. I was not ready to answer him. I was not sure I ever would be. The dwarven workshop was everything Wallace had described. Furnaces the size of houses, workbenches carved from single blocks of stone. The dwarves who worked here were gruff, skeptical, and unimpressed by my title. They cared about what I could build. I told them about Wallace. I told them about the hoe he and I had made together, about the mithril alloy we had developed in Asgard, about the magic rifle. Their eyes changed, not impressed, interested. Gil told them Wallace had sent letters asking them to help me. That settled it. They gathered around the workbench and asked for blueprints. I left Galatea with them to answer technical questions and followed Gil to a room at the back of the workshop. Wallace's room, his old workspace, kept exactly as he had left it, dusty, undisturbed, like a shrine. His tools lay on the bench. A half-finished decorative lantern sat beside them. I picked it up and the bottom panel fell off. Inside, hidden in the base, was a flask of alcohol. Gil burst out laughing. He told me Wallace had been legendary for sneaking drinks into the mine despite the ban. Every dwarf in the workshop had a story about finding one of his hidden flasks in impossible places. They had celebrated his departure with 3 days and 3 nights of drinking. Not because they were glad he was gone, because that was how dwarves said goodbye to someone they love. He also told me that Wallace had left something for me, a box, sealed shut, with instructions to give it to Grace Vermillion if he ever came to dwell. Inside was a prototype, the original model that Wallace and Noelle had designed together, a shotgun, the flower gun's ancestor. I held it and felt the weight of it. Wallace had known I would come here. He had prepared for it. He had left a piece of himself behind so that when I arrived, I would not arrive empty-handed. I opened the World Library and touched the prototype. The data that came back was more detailed than usual. Specifications, improvements, variations I had not considered. Smaller models that a dwarf could carry with one hand. The knowledge settled into my mind like a blueprint drawn by a friend. I went back to the workshop with the prototype and the blueprints in my head. The dwarves were already building the first batch of magic rifles under Galatia's direction. I added the shotgun to the production list. Harold wanted weapons for his soldiers. I would give him weapons built by his own people, in his own forges, from his own mithril. I presented my findings to Harold that evening. The magic rifles pierced mine ant armor. The shotgun would handle close quarters. A gradual assault to reclaim the outer tunnels was feasible. Then I told him the part he did not want to hear. We could not take the queen alone. George was coming with his forces. I planned to use his arrival. George would push into the main tunnels, drawing the swarm's attention. While the ants focused on him, my team and the dwarf soldiers would reach the queen. Harold asked if George knew about this plan. I told him George did not. Harold looked at me for a long moment. Then he said that was the most honest thing anyone had told him in years. I modified the weapons for dwarven hands. Shorter grips, lighter frames. Ruby tested the first adapted rifle and declared it perfect. She ran off to show the dwarf soldiers, dragging Kyle behind her like a reluctant shadow. Adrian found me outside the workshop as the shifts changed. Children were playing in the streets for the first time in months. The potatoes I had planted with Asgard fertilizer that morning were already sprouting. By tomorrow, there would be food. Real food. Not the scraps of a dying kingdom. Adrian said the settlement reminded her of the dwell she had grown up in. She said it quietly, as if saying it louder might break it. I watched the dwarves carry the first batch of rifles to their barracks. Harold stood at the entrance, watching them too. His soldiers had weapons now. His people would have food by morning. And somewhere in the back of the workshop, a one-armed man in a mask was teaching Ruby how to reload. The mine waited below us. The queen waited in the dark. George was coming from the east, and I had a plan that depended on a brother I had not forgiven using a brother I did not trust. I went to the research room and opened a stack of documents about mine ant biology. Some of them were written in dwarven script. Adrian offered to translate. I told her I could read it. She stared at me, then laughed for the first time since I had met her. The night was long. The documents were dense. But for the first time since arriving in Dwell, I felt like I was doing what I was built to do. Reading, learning, finding the answer buried in pages no one else had bothered to open. The useless prince and his useless skill, saving a kingdom one page at a time. The research had given me what I needed. Mine ants felt no pain, no individual will. The soldiers obeyed the queen without hesitation. And if the queen sensed a genuine threat, every ant in the mountain would converge at once, hundreds. So we would not start with the queen. We would start small. I stood at the mouth of the first tunnel with troops formed up behind me. Ruby had squeezed into full mithril gear, shotgun braced against her shoulder. She shouted something encouraging, and the dwarves roared back. Kyle stood near the middle of the column, masked and one-armed, saying nothing. Diana caught my eye and gave a short nod. "Ready, move," I said. We advanced in formation. Galatia took point. Diana held the rear with hand signals. The first ants came in groups of 3 and 4, skittering out of side tunnels with mithril-laced shells glinting in the lantern light. The troops targeted legs first, just like we drilled. A burst of rifle fire. The ant dropped. A follow-up shot finished it. Clean, efficient. By the time we reached the first workshop, we had cleared 11 of them without a single casualty. That was the good news. The bad news was waiting inside. Galatia stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. "Master, I sense 53 biological signatures ahead. 53 in one chamber." I climbed a ledge and she carried me up to a vantage point above the workshop floor. Below, the cavern that had once been the dwarves' primary forge was crawling with ants. They moved across the abandoned anvils and cold furnaces like a living carpet, their mithril-laced shells catching the faint glow of the mineral walls. 53 was too many for a frontal assault, but mine ants ate mithril. It was their primary food source, and they could not resist a high-quality block of it. I sent Galatia back for the bait. She returned carrying a massive block of pure mithril wrapped in cloth, hauled from Neil's steam car. I told her to throw it. She did. The block sailed over the wall and crashed into the workshop floor, crushing one ant flat. Every other ant in the cavern froze. Then, as if a switch had flipped, they swarmed the block. Mandibles scraped against the ore. They pushed and climbed over each other to reach it, completely ignoring us. Diana's voice carried from below. "Give the order." The volley was devastating. Rifles punched through carapaces. The dwarves' shotguns tore through clusters at close range. Neil opened up with the flower gun, turning the narrow space into a kill zone. When it was over, the workshop floor was still. 53 ants, 0 casualties on our side. Ruby hugged Kyle so hard she nearly knocked him over. He stood there with a stunned look on his face, his one arm hanging at his side, and said nothing. I let myself feel the victory for exactly 3 seconds. Then I gathered the scouting party. Diana, Galatea, Kyle, and I pushed deeper through a hidden path. Kyle walked ahead of me. I kept him in my sightline, and he knew it. Trust was not the same as carelessness. Kyle whispered as we moved. He said he could not believe how easily we had taken the workshop. All those ants, and our side had not lost a single soldier. When he was still a prince, he had tried to deal with the mine ants using raw magical power. It had not worked. "It is not my power," I said. "It is cooperation. Weapons made together. Knowledge shared. Nobody stole it from anyone." The words landed harder than I intended. Kyle went quiet after that. Galatea stopped. Her voice dropped. "Master, I sense a massive concentration ahead. Several hundred. Several hundred. Several hundred was too many. We could not punch through to the queen. Not with what we had. But I had known that before we entered the mine. The first workshop was never the goal. It was information. How close could we get before the ants stopped chasing bait and started defending the nest? Now, I had that answer. I had a plan. It required George to be exactly as arrogant as he had always been. Fall back. We have what we need. Harold listened to everything. The first workshop reclaimed. The 53 ants destroyed. The hundreds still blocking the path to the queen. The elders had already left, buoyed by the victory. Harold waited until the door closed behind them before he spoke. He asked me if we could win with current forces. I told him the truth. 1 against 1. Our weapons outmatched the ants, but the numbers were overwhelming. Gradual attrition would take months we did not have, and the queen would adapt before we reached her. Harold nodded. He had already guessed. I told him I had a plan, but it was not straightforward. It required an army that was about to arrive. It required Harold's cooperation, and it required his trust. He said the dwarves owed me a debt they could never repay. If we won, he would place his kingdom under Asgard's banner. I told him we would win first and talk about banners later. He almost smiled. The preparations unfolded over the next few days. Diana drilled mixed units of dwarves and Asgard soldiers in the tunnels near the secured workshop. She had arm wrestled the most stubborn dwarf into compliance on the first day, and by the 3rd day, every dwarf in the squad addressed her as Lady Diana without being asked. The dwarves carried their heavy shotguns. The Asgard soldiers carried rifles, close range and long range, working together. Diana taught them the same thing she had taught Neil. If you meet a force you cannot beat, you run. Pride kills, retreat saves. Meanwhile, Adrian and Gil ran deeper reconnaissance missions, testing how close they could get to the nest before the ants prioritized defense over bait. They came back exhausted, with a marked map and a warning. One ant they had encountered was different from the others. Covered in mithril, faster, more aggressive. It had attacked them on sight, ignoring the bait entirely. Gil said they had barely escaped using magic. I filed that away. An ant with individual will. Rare, according to the World Library, but dangerous. In the square, Galatea distributed potato dishes, with Ruby serving beside her in a maid outfit, because apparently a dwarf princess could not resist the calling. Kyle lurked nearby, watching Ruby with an expression that even his mask could not hide. I ate hot buttered potatoes and let myself enjoy the moment. The food was simple, but it was the first warm meal some of these dwarves had eaten in weeks. Children grabbed seconds. Elderly dwarves sat on stone benches with full plates and wet eyes. Their laughter sounded fragile. I wanted to protect it. Then Neil came running. George had arrived. Diana said it first. She had seen the reports from dwarves living in the human quarter of the city above. George had come with an elite force. The human court had thrown him a feast. Roast meats, wine, music, while the dwarves underground stretched potato rations to feed their children. My jaw tightened. I said nothing for a long moment. Diana remembered never beating George in pure swordsmanship. I told her she had a magic gunblade now. She was not the same knight who had lost to him. Galatea watched us both with that faint smirk she wore when she found humans entertaining. I laid out the plan. We had a spy in our ranks, a soldier who idolized George and had been feeding information back to my brother's camp. I had known about him since the World Library flagged the discrepancy in his background. His name was Walter. Instead of exposing Walter, I would use him. I would let him carry a mind map back to George. A real map, accurate enough that George would trust it, detailed enough that he would feel confident charging in. The map would guide George's forces straight into the densest concentration of ants. George needed to fight the swarm. He needed to draw every ant in the main tunnels toward his army. And while every ant in the mountain rushed to meet George's charge, my team would slip through the chaos to reach the queen. Diana asked if George would survive. I said George had the kingdom's finest soldiers and an orichalcum sword that could cut through super mithril alloy. He would survive. Whether he won was not my problem. That was the part of me that sounded like my father, and I knew it. I chose not to care. Walter left that night. Diana confirmed it from the watchpost. He descended the mountain with the map and a magic rifle tucked under his cloak. I had known about Walter for weeks. The World Library had flagged the discrepancy in his story when he first joined us, and I had let him stay anyway, feeding him exactly what I wanted George to receive. But knowing he was a spy had not stopped me from getting to know him. He had trained hard. He had gotten along well with Neil. He had laughed at the right jokes and volunteered for the worst shifts, and I do not think all of it was an act. Part of me had hoped he would change his mind. He did not. Diana was watching me. She told me I did not have to put on a brave face. Not with her. I told her I was fine, and she let the lie stand because she always knew when to push and when to leave it alone. What Walter found at the bottom of the mountain was not the welcome he expected. His former commander met him at the perimeter, took the rifle from his hands, and told him he would be presenting the intelligence to George as his own discovery. Walter tried to object. The commander reminded him that a third son of a minor noble did not get to object. Walter submitted, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought about Neil knocking on his door that evening with potatoes and ham and an invitation to drink, about the laughter drifting from the training grounds, about a place where a third son of a minor noble had been treated like everyone else. I did not know all of this at the time, but I knew enough about the world that had raised both of us. Before Walter had left, I had placed a letter in his room. It said one thing: if he survived what was coming, there would be a place for him in Asgard. The next morning, Neil brought me that letter. It had been left behind, unopened, or maybe opened and put back. I could not tell. I folded it and put it in my pocket. Some doors stay open whether the person walks through them or not. George moved first. His forces entered the mine from the main tunnels using the map Walter had delivered, exactly as I had planned. At our staging area, Neil was loading the steam car when Kyle appeared. He strolled in with that old theatrical walk, mask tilted, and told us all to stop looking so grim. A leader needed to project confidence, he said. Then he offered to fight. He said he could wield the magic gunblade better than anyone in the unit, better than Diana even. Wind magic let him amplify the blade's reach. One arm was enough. Neil looked at me. I looked at Kyle. I did not fully trust him. I might never fully trust him, but I had watched him with Ruby. I had seen the way his hand shook when he talked about protecting this place. That was not something a man could fake. You work under Neil, I said. His command, his rules. Understood? Kyle smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on him since we were children. Of course, I am just a wandering adventurer, after all. I shook his hand. One hand. He gripped hard enough to hurt. Neil handed Kyle the gunblade. Kyle tested the weight, spun it once with a flourish that was pure muscle memory from his old life, and settled it against his shoulder. Protect this place, I said. For Ruby, even if it costs me my life, he said. The theatrics were gone from his voice. I turned to Diana and Galatea, our team. The Queen's chamber waited below, and George was about to pull every ant in the mountain toward his army. 2 forces, 2 tunnels. One descending with swords and arrogance, and a blade that could cut through anything. The other with knowledge. A robot, a knight with blue hair and a gunblade, and a prince the world had called useless. I took one breath, held it, then we went in. The tunnel narrowed until Diana had to turn sideways. The air tasted like iron and rot. Galatea walked point. Ant movement has shifted. The majority are converging on the main tunnels. George's army drew them. Good, that was the plan. Except the sounds were wrong. The combat is closer to the nest than it should be, Diana said. She had stopped walking. Her eyes were fixed on the rock overhead, reading vibrations the way she read enemy intentions. George is advancing faster than we expected. That meant the ants had not slowed him down, which meant either George was better than I gave him credit for, or the ants were pulling back on purpose. Neither answer was good. We move now, I said. If the queen shifts to full defense before we reach her, this is over. We broke into a run. The passages twisted. The ants had been digging entire corridors that did not exist 3 days ago. Galatea scanned each junction and picked the path that led deeper. The tunnel opened into a chamber the size of a cathedral, and my stomach dropped. Hundreds of eggs, white, cocoon-like, clustered in rows that stretched into the dark. Each one pulsed faintly, the glow of something alive inside. Should I destroy them? Galatea asked. Practical, as always. No, I shook my head. If we touch the eggs before the queen is dead, every ant in this mine comes here. We would not survive that. Diana's hand went to her gunblade. Grace, something is coming, something large, and it is furious. A roar tore through the chamber. Not a sound any insect should have made. Deep, vibrating, the kind of noise that shakes the bones before the brain processes it. The eggs trembled in their rows. 2 shapes materialized from the far corridor. The first was small and winged, darting through the air. A messenger ant, the kind that carries the queen's commands to her swarm. The second was the queen herself. She was enormous. Her upper body was all armor and fury. Mithril-hardened carapace covered every surface. Her eyes were not the dead black of a mindless insect. They were focused, rational. I will take the winged one, Diana said. She was already moving. Galatea, the queen, I will cover you both. We dropped from the ceiling. Diana fired mid-fall, punching through the messenger ant's wing. It spiraled, hit the ground, and she was on it before it could right itself. Done. Galatea's kick connected with the queen's flank. The impact would have shattered stone. The queen slid backward 3 paces, and that was all. I fired at the queen's head. She moved. The shot sparked off her carapace, and then she did something I did not expect. She picked up a chunk of stone and threw it at me. Diana caught me mid-stumble, spinning us both out of the path. Thank you, I managed. Stay behind me. Galatea's voice was wrong, too quiet. The way she sounds only when something is genuinely bad. Master, my attacks are not effective. Her carapace is harder than anything I have encountered. My mind raced. Blunt force would not break the carapace, but mithril had the same weak points as any crystalline metal. Joints, eyes, the abdomen where the egg sac connected. Before I could say any of this, the wall behind us exploded. George came through the gap like a battering ram, orichalcum sword gleaming. Behind him, his soldiers poured in, bloodied and ragged. His eyes found me, and his lip curled. He barked that our little group of 3 was a joke, and his army would finish this. I bit my tongue. Fighting George here would kill us all. His soldiers fanned out. I tried to stop them. I shouted that the eggs were a trap, that destroying them would trigger the queen's full strength. George did not listen. He never listened. He ordered his men forward and raised his orichalcum sword at the queen. What happened next took less than 10 seconds. George's soldiers crushed the eggs. The queen let out a shriek so high-pitched it drove half the soldiers to their knees. And then she stopped holding back. The queen had been fighting at a fraction of her power, splitting attention between combat and protecting the eggs. When the eggs shattered, the restraint vanished. She surged forward. One swipe, and the line crumpled. The queen moved faster than anything her size should have moved, and the soldiers simply could not get out of the way. George swung the orichalcum sword. The blade bit into the queen's carapace, and for one instant, I thought it would work. Then the queen struck back. George flew across the chamber and hit the far wall hard enough to crack the stone. The sword spun from his hand and embedded itself in the ground 20 paces away. The queen turned toward us. Her eyes were no longer rational. They were pure, burning rage. I looked at Diana. Diana looked at me. George just endangered everyone. There was no time for anger. The queen was charging, and behind her, the shriek had done its work. The sound of hundreds of mine ants scrambling through the tunnels toward us shook the walls. Diana, distract the queen. Galatea, get the orichalcum sword, now! Diana moved without hesitation. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one aimed at the queen's eye. 2 missed. The third clipped the edge of the socket, and the queen flinched. It was enough. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I sprinted toward the embedded sword, firing my handgun behind me without looking. Every shot bounced off the queen's carapace. Useless, but it kept her attention split for one more second. The queen was not stupid. She saw the sword. She started moving toward it. Then George did the one useful thing he had done all day. From the rubble where he had landed, bleeding from a gash above his eye, he grabbed a dead soldier's blade and hurled it at the remaining egg clusters on the far side of the chamber. The queen screamed and turned. Her eggs. Her instinct overrode her strategy for one critical moment. Galatea reached the orichalcum sword. She pulled it free, raised it, and brought it down on the queen's leg. The orichalcum cut through the mithril carapace like it was clay. The queen's leg buckled, and she crashed sideways, thrashing, screaming, and then the mine ants arrived. They poured from every tunnel mouth, hundreds of them, drawn by their queen's cry. George's surviving soldiers formed a ragged line. George hauled himself upright and bellowed orders at them, his voice hoarse but unbroken. Somehow, the man who had just caused this disaster was the one holding the defensive line. Diana and I joined the fight, not because I wanted to fight beside George, because the ants would kill us all otherwise. I learned what happened on the second front later. Neil told me most of it. Kyle told me the rest, in fragments, between long silences, after he woke up. This is what happened while we fought the queen. Neil and Kyle were advancing through the secondary tunnels when the evolved ant appeared. It was the same creature George had wounded earlier, the intelligent one-armed mine ant that had escaped into the dark, except it was not the same. It had found a dead soldier's weapon, a magic rifle made of super mithril alloy, and it had eaten it. The metal had fused with its body. Its carapace gleamed with an unnatural sheen, and when Neil's squad fired at it, the bullets bounced off like rain on a window. Kyle told Neil to save the steam car. That is your final weapon. Save it for when it matters. Neil asked what they were supposed to do against a bulletproof ant. Kyle smiled behind his mask. It was the old smile, the one that used to make me want to punch him. I am a magic saint, he said. I can use all magic. This thing picked the wrong opponent. Kyle opened with ice. He froze the ant's feet to the ground, buying himself 3 seconds. He used those seconds to kill every normal mine ant in the corridor, clearing the field for a duel. The evolved ant broke free. Kyle hit it with fire, then ice again. Then a wave of corrosive earth magic that ate at the metal surface. Not to kill it, to fatigue the metal. He had learned this from the dwarves. When you heat metal, then freeze it, then corrode it, the internal structure weakens. Microfractures spread. The alloy that made this ant invincible was still metal, and metal has limits. But the ant was learning too. Kyle's ice worked once. The second time, the ant braced and shattered it before it fully formed. His fire pushed it back, but did not burn. Each spell worked less than the one before, and Kyle had to invent new combinations on the fly. Lightning for conductivity, earth walls to trap, wind to displace, buying room. He was cycling through every school of magic he had ever studied, and the ant was adapting to every single one. I learned later what Kyle was thinking during those minutes. He told me he remembered being a boy, the weakest of 3 brothers. Not the firstborn warrior, not the thirdborn genius everyone called useless, but who turned out to be the smartest person in the kingdom. Kyle was the middle child, the one who compensated with magic because his body could not keep up with George, and his mind could not keep up with mine. He remembered Tia. She had been his maid when he was young, a year older, kind in the quiet way that does not demand attention. When Kyle earned his title as Magic Saint, the first person he wanted to tell was her. He found her in the corridor outside his quarters and told her he had been recognized as a successor to the throne. He asked her to marry him. She smiled, and Kyle told me that smile was the saddest thing he had ever seen. She said he deserved someone better, someone worthy of his rank. She asked instead to stay by his side as his maid, to support him in the only way the world would allow. Kyle told me he accepted her answer because he was young enough to believe that being close to someone was the same as being with them. It was not. The nobles in his court arranged Tia's marriage to a minor lord within the year. Kyle heard about it after the fact. He did not leave his room for 3 days. He told me he spent those days trying to understand why being the kingdom's strongest mage meant nothing when it came to protecting one person's freedom. That was the thought in his head when the mine ant's strike drove him backward and his mask cracked. The porcelain fell away, and Neil saw his face for the first time. "Kyle," Neil breathed. Kyle did not deny it. He trapped the ant in a prison of earth, roots of stone erupting from the ground to pin it in place. It would not hold long. Go, Kyle said. There is a new queen deeper in the tunnels. If she survives, everything we have done here is pointless. Take the steam car. Kill her. Neil hesitated. Kyle was smiling again, but it was not the arrogant smile I remembered. It was tired. You must hate me. Would it not be convenient if I died here? Go on. Leave it to me. Neil went. He told me later that when he looked back, Kyle's face looked exactly like mine when I am excited about something impossible. Kyle fought alone. He told me the details in pieces over the following days, between long pauses where he stared at the ceiling and said nothing. I am filling in the gaps the way I fill in all gaps, with what I know of my brother and what I know of that mine. The earth prison crumbled. The ant came at him, and Kyle met it with lightning. The bolt hit the ant's mithril surface and conducted through, buying Kyle one flinch of hesitation. He followed with ice aimed at the joints, then fire at the cracks the ice had opened. Metal fatigue, layer by layer. The ant's carapace was splitting in hairline fractures that Kyle could not see but could feel through the resistance of each spell. The ant adapted. It stopped charging blindly and started circling, waiting, letting Kyle burn through his reserves. Kyle was running out of magic. He had been casting continuously since the fight began, cycling through more spells in 15 minutes than most mages cast in a month. His body was failing. The arm he had lost in our battle years ago was not there to stabilize his stance. He stumbled. The ant did not miss the opening. Kyle collapsed. His body had simply given out. I will not describe the wound because I did not see it, and Kyle does not talk about it. What I know is this: he went down and he did not get up. But the ant was broken too. Kyle's metal fatigue strategy had worked. The creature stood over him, cracked and listing. Its stolen weapon fused to an arm that could barely lift it. Kyle had not won, but he had made it possible for someone else to finish the fight. In the distance, through the ringing in his ears, Kyle heard an engine. Neil drove like a man possessed. He had found the new queen. He had killed her. He had found Walter on the way, wounded and alone in a corridor after his captain had been killed by the same evolved ant days earlier. Walter had tried to stop the new queen by himself and failed, but he knew the tunnels, and Neil needed a guide. Together, they had finished the job. Now they were racing back, because Neil had a feeling. The kind of feeling you get when someone you do not even like is doing something impossibly brave somewhere you cannot see. The steam car's headlamp found Kyle on the ground, and the ant standing over him. Neil did not slow down. He aimed the car at the ant and floored the accelerator. The impact drove the ant sideways, pinning it against the tunnel wall. The creature thrashed, but its cracked carapace could not take the pressure. Neil threw the car into reverse, and the ant stumbled forward, off balance. Walter, get him out of there! Walter leaped from the car and ran to Kyle. He hesitated for one heartbeat. This was the prince whose army he had betrayed, the brother of the Lord whose kingdom he had abandoned. But Kyle was bleeding and not moving, and Walter was not the kind of man who could watch someone die. He lifted Kyle and carried him to the car. Neil backed up, lined up the shot, and fired the mounted gun twice. The rounds punched through the ant's fractured armor, and it collapsed. Kyle's work had weakened the creature to the point where 2 shotgun blasts could do what 100 rifle shots could not. He is still breathing, Walter called from the back. But the bleeding will not stop. Neil drove, faster than the tunnels should have allowed, sparks flying from the walls where the car scraped stone, toward the surface, toward the healers, toward the chance that Kyle might see daylight again. Back in the Queen's chamber, the battle had become a war of attrition. Galatea fought with the orichalcum sword in a way George never could have. She did not swing wildly. She targeted joints, weak points, the Queen's remaining legs, one at a time. Each cut was surgical, precise, the kind of attack that only makes sense when the attacker knows exactly where the armor is thinnest. Diana and I held the flanks, keeping the swarming mine ants from overwhelming Galatea's position. Diana moved through the ants with the economy of someone who had been training mixed combat units for weeks. Her gunblade fired and cut in the same motion. I stayed behind her and shot anything that came from the sides, which was most things. George held the other flank with his surviving soldiers. He had lost his sword to Galatea and was fighting with a dead man's blade, but he was still George. Raw power, relentless. The ants broke against his line because he refused to take a single step backward. I hated him. I hated what his arrogance had done to this battle, but I could not deny that his stubbornness was keeping us alive. Galatea struck the final blow. The orichalcum blade drove into the Queen's abdomen, through the mithril carapace, deep into the center of mass. The Queen shuddered. Her legs gave way. She hit the ground so hard the chamber shook, and then she was still. The mine ants stopped, not gradually, not one by one, all of them at the same instant, as if someone had cut the string holding them upright. They milled in place, confused, purposeless. Without the queen's will to direct them, they were nothing but insects. The silence was so sudden it hurt. George crossed the chamber toward us. His soldiers fell in behind him, fewer than half the number he had brought in. He stopped in front of Galatea and demanded his sword back. Galatea looked at me. I nodded. She held out the orichalcum blade, hilt first. George took it without a word of thanks. Then he looked at me. I looked back. For the first time in my life, I did not flinch. I did not look away. I stood in that ruined chamber, covered in dust and ant ichor, and I met my eldest brother's eyes. He said he would not steal credit from the person who killed the queen. He said that much honor remained in him. But we had only succeeded because we arrived early. His forces could have handled it alone. I should not forget that. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. We both knew who had triggered the queen's rampage. We both knew whose strategy had saved the mine, and we both knew George would never admit either of those things. He turned and walked away. His soldiers followed. The torchlight receded down the tunnel until the chamber was dark except for our own lamps. My legs gave out. Diana caught me before I hit the ground. Grace, are you all right? I was shaking. Not from fear, not from cold, from the simple, overwhelming relief of being alive. The queen was dead. The mines were reclaimed. The plan had worked, even after George had nearly destroyed it. I am fine. I was not fine. My hands would not stop trembling. We are not done. The words came out steadier than I felt. There are still scattered ants in the tunnels, and there was an evolved one on the second front. We need to clear the survivors and get back to the surface. Diana pulled me to my feet and kept her hand on my arm until I was steady. Galatea cleaned the orichalcum residue from her own blade and took point without being asked. We moved through the tunnels, clearing the last of the disoriented ants. It took hours. By the time we reached the surface, my legs ached and my ears were still ringing from the queen's final shriek. The first thing I heard when we stepped into daylight was Neil's name. Someone from the settlement ran toward us, breathless. Neil had returned. He had killed the new queen, and Kyle, the masked man called Kane, had been brought back critically wounded. They were treating him now. They did not know if he would survive. I stood in the morning light and felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. We had won. The mines were ours. The queen was dead. But Kyle was bleeding in a tent somewhere below me, and the victory tasted like dust. The dwarves threw a feast the way dwarves do everything, loud, generous, and with enough alcohol to dissolve an iron gate. Long stone tables filled the courtyard. Fire pits crackled between them. Galatea had commandeered a cooking station and was producing fried potatoes at a pace that bordered on industrial. Ruby worked beside her, serving plates with a grin that could have lit the courtyard on its own. Dwarves and Asgard soldiers sat elbow to elbow, trading the kind of laughter that only comes after you have survived something together. I watched from the edge. The problems had not stopped just because the queen was dead. The mines were gutted. The ore was nearly gone. The dwarves who remained would face a slow decline unless something changed. I had won the battle. The aftermath was another war entirely. Diana appeared beside me with a wooden plate of fried potatoes and a cup of something that smelled like it could strip paint. With a face like that, the hero is going to ruin the party. She pushed the cup into my hand. Drink. I drank. The dwarf alcohol hit my throat like swallowing a lit match and kept burning. My eyes watered. I made a sound that was not dignified. Diana laughed, actually laughed, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. You were not supposed to drink it all at once. Could have mentioned that first. She handed me water. I took it gratefully. Adrian and Gil found us a few minutes later. Gil was already 3 drinks deep and swaying like a tree in a windstorm. Adrian was steadier, but her eyes were warm in a way I had not seen before. We have something to tell you, Adrian said. She glanced at Gil, who raised his cup in a sloppy salute. We have decided to stay in Dwell permanently. The words landed heavier than I expected, but I looked at Adrian's face and saw something I recognized. She had found the place where she fit. Dwell is lucky to have you, I said. I meant it. Gil threw an arm around my shoulder. His breath could have knocked out a wyvern. You are the hero. You should be in the middle of the party, not skulking at the edge. I am not the hero. I gently extracted myself from the headlock. The people of Dwell are. We just came to help. Gil opened his mouth to argue, but Harold appeared at the edge of the firelight. The dwarf king looked smaller out of his throne room, older in the shifting orange glow, but his eyes were clear. May I have a word with you? He said. In another room, Harold poured drinks. not the paint stripper from outside. Something clearer, milder. He had not been drinking at the feast. For a dwarf king after a victory, that meant the weight on his mind was heavier than the celebration. He thanked us formally. I told him the truth. I had come partly on my father's orders, and partly because this was Wallace's homeland. Harold nodded. Then he said what he had brought us here to say. The ore was nearly depleted. The remaining dwarves would face starvation within a year. He asked if Asgard would accept dwarf immigrants. Asgard has mines, I said, and we do not care whether the hands that work them belong to dwarves or humans. If your people come, they will be citizens, not guests, not laborers, citizens. Harold's jaw tightened, not with anger, with the effort of holding himself together. And those who stay behind? I did not have a good answer for that. Some would stay out of pride, or stubbornness, or love for a land that was dying under their feet. We will send Adrian and Gil as liaisons. They have chosen to stay, and we will keep trade open. Dwell will not be forgotten. Harold looked at the table. You are kind, he said quietly, but that too is Dwell's fate. We should be grateful that so many can be saved. Before I could respond, the door burst open. A dwarf messenger, breathing hard, eyes wild. A giant golem, he gasped. From the lower levels, it is asking to speak with us. Diana and I exchanged a glance. We both knew exactly one person who built golems that size. We took the elevator down and found Arthur standing on top of a golem the size of a house. George's soldiers had surrounded him. Arthur looked entirely unbothered. He stood on the golem's shoulder, arms crossed, chin raised, and the confident grin of a man who had traveled an absurd distance on the back of a mechanical giant. I am a messenger from Asgard, Arthur declared to the soldiers. Take me to Grace. I have brought what was ordered. I had not ordered anything. Diana raised an eyebrow at me. I shrugged. I told them to stand down. Arthur climbed down, and for the first time, I saw what the golem was carrying. Something massive, covered in canvas. Arthur pulled the tarp aside with a flourish. This, he said, is the invention that saves Dwell. It was a furnace, not just any furnace. A furnace built from supermithril alloy, reinforced with Eleanor's golem forging techniques, designed by Arthur himself, and conceived by Wallace. Wallace, who had not said a word about it. Wallace, who had trusted that I would save Dwell from the monsters, and quietly prepared the thing that would save Dwell from everything after. Wallace came up with the concept, Arthur explained, pride spilling over every word. I designed the specifications. Eleanor's golem built it. It can withstand temperatures no ordinary furnace can reach. The dwarves can use it to process mithril ore into materials they have never been able to create before. Supermithril alloy, composites, things that do not exist yet. Wallace had believed I would win. He had believed it so completely that he had skipped past the battle entirely and started solving the problem that came after. Let us take it to Harold, I said. Harold touched the furnace the way a man touches something holy. His hands ran over the alloy surface. The other dwarves pressed close, murmuring in their own language, voices rising with disbelief and hope fighting for the same breath. Arthur explained the terms. I let him. He had earned it. First, as a sign of friendship, we will teach you how to create supermithril alloy. Arthur paused for effect. He was enjoying this. The method is yours to keep, free. Harold looked up. Are you certain? You have already saved us. This is too much. It is not free entirely, I said. Arthur glanced at me with approval. 5% of profits from inventions made with this furnace, and regular technology exchange meetings between Dwell and Asgard. We share what we learn, both ways. Harold stared at me, then at the furnace, then back at me. 5%, he repeated. 5%. The dwarf king's eyes filled. He did not try to hide it. He was old enough and had suffered enough to know that some moments were worth the tears. Dwell is truly saved, he said. His voice cracked on the last word, not just from the ants, from everything. The room erupted. Dwarves talking over each other, already imagining what they could build. Diana was watching me from the corner, not her usual guarded half smile, a real one, proud. I stepped out and let them celebrate. Arthur fell into step beside me. Wallace said you would save them. I told him you probably would. Eleanor said she already knew. He grinned. We just did what we could from our end. You crossed an entire country on a golem's back carrying a furnace. Eleanor's golem did the walking. I just provided the charm. Diana snorted. Arthur did not appear to notice. The immigration would continue. The young dwarves would come to Asgard, but now the dwarves who stayed behind had something to build with. The furnace did not just solve one problem. It gave Dwell a future. Wallace had given his homeland a future without being asked. I was going to have words with that man when I saw him, probably starting with thank you and ending with, why did you not tell me? The celebration was still echoing through the corridors when Diana and I went to check on Kyle. The room was empty, the bed was made, the window was open, curtains moving in the mountain wind. No struggle, just absence. On the pillow, folded once, was a letter. I picked it up. The handwriting was Kyle's, elegant even when rushed. He wrote that George's people had found him. An assassin had come during the feast, not sent officially, but acting on the knowledge that Kyle was alive and allied with me. The assassin carried a threat. There was a spy near Tia. If Kyle remained in Dwell, if he continued to work with me, Tia would pay the price. Kyle had captured the assassin. He released him instead, because a dead assassin would only confirm his location. Then he left. The last lines of the letter were the ones that stayed with me. Take care of Dwell for me. Take care of Ruby. And if you ever get the chance, look after Tia. She does not deserve any of this. None of them do. And at the very bottom, almost an afterthought, I will watch from afar to see how the path you have found turns out. I hope it leads somewhere good. Goodbye, Grace. I read it twice, then I folded it and put it in my coat. Diana stood by the window, looking out at the cliff face below. The drop was enormous. Kyle had jumped it. Of course he had. He was the greatest mage in the kingdom, even with one arm. A cliff was nothing. He could have asked for help, I said. Diana did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful. He does not think he deserves it. She was right. That was the worst part. Kyle had attacked Asgard. People had died. In his mind, everything I had given him since then was already more than he had earned. Asking me to protect Tia on top of that was a debt he could not bring himself to carry. The tragedy was not that Kyle left. The tragedy was that I would have said yes. Ruby found us in the corridor. She was wearing the maid outfit. Her hair was tied back with that red gem pin. She was smiling. The smile did not reach her eyes. I heard he left. Her voice was bright. Too bright. The kind of brightness that takes effort. Well, he was always a traveler. I figured he would go eventually. I looked at her face and saw the tear stains. They ran from the corners of her eyes to her jawline, still damp. She had wiped them away before coming to find us. She was a princess. Her people had just been saved. She would not burden them with her own loss. Ruby, I said. It is fine. She waved a hand. Too fast. Dwell has the furnace now, and I am coming to Asgard with you. I heard you have the most advanced workshop on the continent. The grin came back, forced and defiant. Someone has to make sure you humans do not waste it. Diana put a hand on Ruby's shoulder. Just that. No words. Ruby's smile wavered for half a second, and then she locked it back into place. I made a promise in that corridor, not out loud. Promises spoken too soon become chains. But I made it all the same. Kyle and Tia. Someday, somehow, I would find a way. We left Dwell 2 days later. The steam car rolled through the hills with the mountains falling behind us. Ruby sat on the back rail, legs dangling, watching her homeland shrink. Beside me, Diana rode with her hand resting near mine on the bench. Not quite touching, not quite not. In the back, with the supplies and the dwarf immigrants, Wallace sat quietly. I had been dreading this conversation since the feast. If there was ever a moment for Wallace to choose Dwell, this was it, and I would not have blamed him. Wallace, he looked up. Your homeland is saved. The furnace will give them a future. If you want to stay and Dwell and help them rebuild, I understand. I kept my voice steady. You do not owe me anything. You never did. Wallace looked at me for a long time. Then he looked back at the mountains, growing smaller behind us. Then he turned forward, toward the road ahead, and spoke 4 words. Asgard is my home. He said it simply, the way you say something that does not need defending, not with passion or argument or conflict, just a quiet fact, as natural as saying the sky was blue or the road was long. I will visit Dwell, he continued. I will help them through trade and through the furnace, but my family is in Asgard. You, Diana, Galatea, Noel, Neil, Eleanor. He paused. That is where I belong. I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. He had saved his blood home, using skills he had learned in his heart home. Both places were real. Both mattered. He chose the one where he was free. Well, I managed. Good, because Noelle has probably redesigned half the workshop while we were gone, and someone needs to tell her that the ventilation ducts are not optional. Wallace chuckled. It was a low, warm sound, like a hammer on an anvil, like home. Ruby, from the back, piped up. So Asgard has a dwarf princess now. You are all very lucky. Terrified, I said. The word you are looking for is terrified. She threw a potato at me. Asgard appeared on the horizon like a promise kept. The walls were taller than when we left. New scaffolding climbed the southern section. The fields were green with crops in neat rows. The stone statue of me at the gate was, as always, far more heroic than the real thing. Galatea greeted us at the gate. She delivered a formal welcome that somehow included a status report, a pantry inventory, and a gentle observation that Noelle deserved a reward. Noelle had oil stains on her sleeves, and a wrench behind her ear, and the look of someone who had been holding the territory together with both hands. "Welcome back," she said. Then, quieter, "I redesigned the water pump and the grain elevator and part of the southern wall foundation." A pause. "Please do not be mad about the wall. I am not mad about the wall. It is much better now. I believe you." Neil appeared at a jog, grinning wide enough to split his face. He had filled out. The boy who had arrived as a starving refugee looked like a soldier now. He snapped a salute and then abandoned all formality to clap Wallace on the back hard enough to stagger a human. Wallace, being a dwarf, did not move. Eleanor was already examining Arthur's golem with professional interest, asking questions that Arthur was answering with increasing enthusiasm and decreasing coherence. I stood at the gate and watched them, all of them. My father had called this territory a death sentence. My brothers had laughed when the gates closed behind me. I looked at Asgard, at the walls, the fields, the workshop smoke rising over the rooftops, the people walking the streets who had come from everywhere and nowhere and chosen to stay. Diana stepped up beside me. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The useless prince had built something his father never could. Not a kingdom held together by fear or bloodlines or the threat of a sword. A kingdom held together by choice. Nobody was coming to save us. We had stopped waiting for that a long time ago, and standing at the gate of the place I had built from nothing, with the afternoon light warm across the stone and the sound of my people welcoming each other home, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not triumph, not pride, something simpler. I was home, and for the first time, that word did not taste like something I had lost. It tasted like something I had made.